Welcome to Mr. Nightspook. Tonight, in 6 true nightmarish encounters, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, we step off the blacktop and into country where the map folds wrong and echoes learn your name. These are confessions from fog-choked hollers and shuttered coal towns, of switchbacks where a man sees himself waving him off the cliff, of light skimming the balds like search parties for the living, of a clapboard church swallowed by laurel where the floorboards still whisper roll call. You'll hear about the tipple that clocks in the dead, the creek that trades in names, and a ridge that answers back wrong. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 1,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a road, holler, or trail in your area that locals avoid, drop its name. Because once you walk these ridgelines and whisper to these valleys, the mountains whisper back, kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I've been turning this over in my head for months, and every time I try to tell it out loud, I can't get past the part where I hear myself in the hollow. Only the words don't belong to me. Maybe writing it down will feel safer. Like putting a lock on a door you know won't hold, but at least lets you pretend. My name is Eli. I've done roofing and patchwork since I was old enough to carry a bundle of shingles up a ladder without wobbling. If you've driven any back road east of Jackson and seen a tarp stapled to a trailer, or a patched ridgeline with mismatched tabs, there's a decent chance my boot prints have been on that roof. It's not glamorous, but it keeps food in the kitchen when the weather cooperates and the phone rings. Last spring the phone didn't ring much. Amber and I had split the winter before, and I was trying to keep the lights on in a rented cinder block house on the floodplain that nobody else wanted. My truck was a '97 Chevy with 2 shades of blue and a bed that squeaked when you breathed on it. My daughter June was 8 and thought my tape measure was magical because I could pull shiny numbers out of thin air and make wood become a square. On a Tuesday in late April, after a rain that didn't seem to touch the ground so much as sit on it like a tired dog, I got a call from a man named Caldwell. He said he had a place at the dead end of a hollow off the county road. Nobody lived there full-time, and the roof over the kitchen had started to leak. He needed someone cheap and soon. He'd pay cash. It's an afternoon if you know what you're doing, he said. Bring nails and a sense of humor. I asked him where it was. He told me the name of the hollow. Even saying it out loud felt like putting a small stone under your tongue. Folks around there didn't call it by its name if they could help it. They just said that holler, and if pressed, described it by what it had swallowed over the years. A mailbox that kept migrating up the slope with every spring flood. 2 off-year black bears. An old Ford tractor with a stuck axle that still showed its rear tires like a fish's tail when the creek ran low. I'd never worked at the dead end. Nobody called from that far in. But cash was cash. I asked if he wanted a second set of hands. He said, if it makes you feel better, and didn't say why it might. I called my friend Mason. He's the kind of man who can look at a board and tell you which side faced south on the tree. We'd worked together off and on for 10 years. Whenever he came off a job down in Lexington or needed to be back where the ridges tell you what time it is by the shade on their faces, he said, I'll ride out. Today? I said today. He said he had a dentist at 2. Get me home by 1:30 and I'll forget about it. We met at the gas station where the hot dog rollers hiss no matter what time of day it is. The clerk with the lazy eyelid tapped the register with a finger that had a bandage on it and said the weather would hold if we didn't look up at the sky too often. He meant it like a joke, but people around here say things like that and glance at the door. I paid for 2 coffees and a pack of nails. Mason threw a tarp in the back of my truck and we rattled east, then south, then off the blacktop onto a road that had given up expecting to be paved again. You can learn a lot about a place by how the road behaves going into it. The county road shrugged up and down polite hills, past pasture and trailers with satellite dishes big as trampolines. Then we turned left at a cairn of river rock that might have been a mailbox once, and the road stopped pretending. It narrowed until it was the width of my truck and some soft argument about where the edges were. Trees leaned in because they could. The hollow bunched around us. You know how some hollows feel like the sides of a bowl holding you up? This one felt like a mouth deciding whether to close. Caldwell's place sat where the track ran out. Sagging farmhouse, 2 stories, front porch dipped like a frown, a roofline the color of old pennies. Kudzu had wrapped the outbuildings like a mother that would smother if you gave her a minute. The dry creek bed was a ribbon of chalky stone that, in summer storms, went from a whisper to a shout in 20 minutes and back down just as quick. We pulled into the dirt apron that served as parking and saw the patch over the kitchen, 5 or 6 shingles blown clean away, black felt showing like a popped blister. There was nobody around when we walked up. He'd said he'd leave a key under the frog by the porch steps, and sure enough, there was a concrete frog heavier than you'd think, with a rusty key under its flat belly. The inside smelled like old cedar and that winter-closed house smell that might be dust and might be memories. The kitchen had a bucket under a water stain on the ceiling, a faded calendar from 3 years ago with squares filled in up until June, then nothing. We opened windows that the frames let us and listened to the place breathe. On a job like that, you measure twice, cut once, joke 3 times to keep your knees from noticing you're older than you were the last time you did a job like that. I got my tape measure out and snapped it off the eaves. 4/8, I called down to Mason, meaning 48 inches. He was writing the measurements on a pad, his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder like it was a horse that might shy. 4/8, he said back, and wrote it. Then I measured the next span. 3/4, I said. He looked over his shoulder, the pencil in his mouth like a cigarette he hadn't lit. What? 34. He nodded and wrote it down. We moved like that for 5 measurements. On the 6th, the wind, which hadn't existed a moment before, plucked at my shirt. The tape shivered and the numbers jumped like fish. I pulled it tight. 2-9, I called. My voice landed on the yard like a thrown glove. 2-7, the hollow said back. I looked at Mason. He squinted up at me. I could see the question shape his face before he said it. What did you say? 2-9. Okay. He wrote 2-9, but his pencil hovered like it wanted permission. The next one I measured to make sure. 3-6, I said, putting my hand flat against the shingles like you might on the side of a stubborn animal. 3-6, Mason said. But the echo in the hollow took its time and came back patient and wrong. 3-7. Mason's eyes slid over to the trees like a man glancing at a bad neighbor. These walls are steep, he said. Echo bounces weird. It's nothing. He said it like you say it's nothing about a mole you've been watching for a year. We kept working. I tried not to call out numbers if I could help it, but old habits are old for a reason. When you're on a roof, you say what you see. It keeps you from forgetting where your feet are. The tape was a live wire in my hand. Every measurement felt like asking a question you didn't want the answer to. Sometimes the hollow repeated me clean, polite as a bank teller. Sometimes it hesitated and said a number I hadn't said, an inch or 2 off, as if it were a brother who loved you enough to teach you a lesson you didn't ask for. By 11:30, we had a patch hand-cut and fitted, the shingles nailed down and the ridge caulked. Mason checked his watch like it was my boss. I've got to be at that dentist, he said, tapping his cheek. Root canal, he added, to make the sum of our day fair. We put away tools. I wanted to be done and gone as much as he did, but the right side of the patch bothered me. The slope dipped more than it should. I pressed the shingle. It moved under my palm like bread dough. Give me 15, I said. You go on. I'll follow. You sure? Mason said. Truck's running rough. If I get stranded, I'm calling you and lying about where I am so you don't feel like you have to come back here. Go, I said. You're making me nervous like a cat watching a bath. He laughed and clapped my shoulder. Text me when you're on the county road, he said. He pulled away down the 2-rut track, his taillights winking once where the trees leaned in. The house creaked after he left, a sound like someone sitting on a bed you thought was empty. I checked the dip. The board beneath had swollen. I pried up 2 shingles and found a bit of rot the rain had found before me. It wasn't much, but it was enough to justify staying. I cut back a little farther than I needed so the edges would be clean. When you do a job in a place like that, you know you're not just fighting water. You're fighting everything that place has decided it wants to be. The hollow wanted to be a throat and the house was a word stuck in it. A few minutes turned into an hour. The sun slid behind a cloud and stayed. The light went gray the way it does when spring gives up pretending to be summer for a day. I hammered carefully and tried not to announce the numbers. My phone, face up on the shingles, lit with a text. It was Amber, checking if I had June Thursday or Friday because her sister had asked about a sleepover. I typed with my thumbs, gloves bunched on the roof beside me, and told her Friday was mine. As I hit send, the hollow repeated quietly, almost relieved. Friday is mine. It sounded like remembering. I rested on my heels. You can lie to yourself that what you heard is the tail end of your own voice running around the bend. You can tell yourself it's the shape of the land playing tricks with the word. I told myself that. The nail between my teeth tasted like the inside of a coin purse. I stood up and looked down the slope to the dry creek bed. A breeze that didn't touch the treetops ran its right hand along the stones and moved a brown leaf 6 inches, like it had an appointment to keep. I nailed the new shingle and took a step back. Something moved in the corner of my eye up by the ridge, the quick stutter of a nailhead walking out of wood. I watched another one corkscrew from the plank like it had changed its mind about what kind of metal it wanted to be. They rose 3/16, a fraction any roofer knows in his fingers, then settled as if embarrassed. I swallowed and told myself it was the board drying under the weak sun, flexing. It happens. It does. I called Caldwell to tell him I'd gone a little heavier on the patch and it would add an hour. He didn't pick up. I left a message. My voice sounded small in that kitchen with the bucket and the calendar with empty squares. I heard myself ask for a call back, and then, out beyond the porch, a second me said softly, "Call back," like a child learning to speak by listening behind a door. I cleaned up the mess I'd made twice as tidy as I usually would have. Then I threw the tarp over my shoulder and climbed down. I walked around the house once more because it felt like something a respectful person would do. The back door, which I hadn't opened, rested against the jamb at a funny angle, as if it had been shut 100 times hard and each time forgiven. Kudzu had eaten a shed whole, leaving only the suggestion of a door under a green blister. I went to my truck. The bed creaked hello. The key turned in the ignition like it had been waiting for me. The engine didn't catch. It turned over, coughed, and gave me a sad look. I tried again. The battery had the pep of a retiree the day after a family reunion. I swore the small kind of swears you use when you don't want to wake a house. I popped the hood and stared into a tangle I had no business pretending to understand. An old habit made me check the gas, which was generous. I jiggled the negative lead on the battery, as if jiggling ever helped anything but nerves. I tried the ignition again. It made a noise like a fish deciding not to bite. Then it made no noise at all. I texted Mason. Trucks being stupid might be late. Good luck with the dentist. A minute passed. Another. No dots. The trees kept their hands in their pockets. I called Caldwell again. Nothing. I checked my signal. 1 bar that came and went like a shy dog. There's a point in every small problem where it realizes it has a shot at being a big one. I looked up the track we'd driven, where the ruts kinked around a tree with a scar on its bark like a mouth. The light had turned that clean-edged late afternoon where you could cut your finger on a shadow. It wasn't a place I wanted to walk alone with only a nail apron and whatever stubbornness I wore like a jacket. "Help!" I called, because the hollow had done a good job convincing me it could carry a voice farther than legs could walk before dark. "Hey, anybody up there?" "Help," came back, my pitch but wrong in the chest. "Stay on the road." I was quiet then. The concrete frog on the porch step looked toward me like he had advice. Stay on the road had been one of my father's rules when we catfished at night on the river, and he didn't trust 9-year-old me to not fall in when the bank moved under my feet. Stay on the road was the teenager version you told yourself when boys in loud trucks asked you to cut through a pasture to save 5 minutes. Stay on the road had the weight of old wisdom because it's how you keep from getting lost even when the road wants you. But it wasn't what I'd said, and I hadn't said it in this hollow since I'd been old enough to know better. "Who's there?" I called, hating how it made me sound like I'd agreed to be in a bad play. "Who's there?" the hollow answered, and then, as if amused, "Who's where?" The last word bent and sat down on the bank like it planned to stay. I told myself something simple and stupid. People hid out in these hills for 1,000 reasons. There could be a man up in the rhododendron knuckles with a cooler and a radio listening for company. There could be a kid with a phone recording me to put on the internet and laugh. I'd come to fix a roof, not solve a story. I shut the hood. I put my tools back in the truck because leaving them on the ground made me feel like I was surrendering something. I took my tape measure, the tool I put my name on because it's the one I use to make sense of the world, and hooked it to my belt. Then I started walking. At the first bend, where the road pressed its shoulder to a fall of stone held back by a wall that might have been stacked by somebody's granddad, there was a patch of dust soft as sifted flour. My boot prints made perfect ovals, the kind you can read, size 11.5, left heel heavier because the knee had an old memory. Beside my tracks, a second set appeared as I watched. They weren't there, and then they were, like someone had pressed them into the dust with a mold. They were the same size as mine. The toe pointed the direction I was going, and the stride was a half step ahead. The way you walk with a friend when you're telling a story, and he's so eager to hear it that his body leans into the next sentence before you say it. I looked up, heart making a sound that nails make when the hammer misses. The trees didn't blink. A woodpecker ran its head into a trunk twice and decided against a third time. I looked back down. The prints continued to appear, one, then the other, soft edges fuzzed by the lazy air. They turned where the road turned. When the track went left, the prints went slightly left before mine did, like a suggestion made helpful by someone with patience. "No," I said out loud, which is the same thing as saying yes if you're speaking to yourself. I stepped off into the ditch and tried the bank. If I cut across the slope, I could meet the road where it straightened and avoid whatever game was being played on the flats. The dirt was damp under its top coat of dry. Kudzu vines looped like slack ropes and caught at my boots softly as if to say, "Let me help." The moment I committed to the slope, the left side of the road felt farther away than it should have. Like the house down the block when you're a child and you run and your breath goes thin and the door never quite gets taller. "Stay on the road," my voice said from somewhere to my right. And now it was a tired voice, the kind that had told me to hold the rail on the stairs when I was small and asleep on my feet. I dug my heel into the slope and hauled myself back up. It wasn't a noble decision, it was a practical one, like backing down a bet you didn't need to make. On the road, the prints waited, patient. They took a step when I did. At the second bend, where the dry creek slid under a culvert and pretended to be a straight line for 6 feet, the prints tried to steer me left around a fall of brush that made an obstacle course of the track. I went right, stubborn. The brush looked old and friendly, a child could climb through it like a fort. As I brushed past, the vines shifted without wind, and a dozen dry leaves turned their pale undersides toward me like eyes. Sometimes walking out of a place takes longer than walking in, even if the sun hasn't moved that far. The whole world inside that hollow felt a degree too dim, the way a room feels when one bulb in a row of fluorescence is late to wake up. The usual noises you can count on, gnats at your ears, the burble of the never-quite-dry creek under the rocks, a farm dog deciding you're worth announcing, were absent. My own breath was loud. Then I heard it. A footstep that wasn't mine. Half step ahead, left first, the heel sliding a little like an old injury lives there. I raised my eyes and called in a voice I tried to make level. "I don't want any trouble." "Any trouble," came back, like the hollow had stored the phrase for a rainy day. Then, softly, almost to itself, "June." I stopped moving. The word hung between the trees like a thread you can't see until it catches the light. I hadn't said my daughter's name. I had thought it stupidly, like everyone thinks of the one thing that proves the world is still real when the edges blur. Her missing front tooth, the way she squinted like she was solving a crime when she sounded out a long word. Her apology. Whenever it rained hard, "Sorry, Dad, the roof is loud." Like she'd done something to make the drops fall louder on my old tarps. "Don't," I said to the air. "Don't do that." "Don't," came back. And then the patient voice lowered a notch as if bending to speak to a child. "Eli, don't." It had the weight of someone who had known me long enough to be tired of knowing me. I forced my legs to move. I chose the middle of the track and kept my eyes up. I tried not to watch the prints appear in front of me like the future spelling itself. Every time the road bent, the prints tested each option first. When I took the other, the trees seemed to shift in small ways. A mirror hung a hair crooked. Branches that had not been over my head reached to meet each other as if I were a ceremony. The culverts sweated like the air around them was older than the air I carried in my lungs. Twice I stopped, convinced I'd come to a place I should remember and didn't. and my hand went to the tape at my belt as if a number could keep me from being unmade. At the third bend, someone had nailed a sheet of tin to a tree to make a target. The tin had rusted to red lace and bent under its own memory. I banged it with my knuckles because I wanted to make a sound the hollow had to listen to. It rang, and then tried not to, like a bell you hit gently on a Sunday when the baby is asleep. From up on the slope to my left came an answer. My knock exactly, only it landed on me with the same familiarity as my name from Amber's mouth when she was tired of forgiving me. "You can have the road," I said. "I'm leaving." "You can have..." "Leave," came back. The phrase walked around a corner and came home with a smudge of something I couldn't name. "Stay," it added, as if it were trying on the word to see if it fit the way I wore it. Then, almost businesslike, "Overdue," the way an envelope says it and you don't open it because you don't need it to tell you. That word touched every place I'd been thoughtless with money. Every bill I'd shoved into the junk drawer to keep my daughter from seeing the red bar at the top. I stood in the road with my hands at my sides and knew that, if I was not careful, this place would peel me like an onion until I forgot the simple skills that had kept me fed. Measure, cut, nail, seal. You can't tell a hollow what you don't want it to repeat. It will take the thing you flinch at and lay it out in front of you as if it's helping. I made it as far as the mouth of the hollow before the sky gave up the argument it had been having with itself and let go a thin rain. It was the kind that won't soak you but will ruin a mood. The county road ran across my path like a polite highway, suddenly remembering it had somewhere to be. I could have turned left, started walking toward the gas station with the bored clerk and the rolling hot dogs, and called a tow with better reception. I should have. I looked right, back toward Caldwell's place, and felt a pull like a string tied to a tooth the day you decide to be brave and slam the door. "Stay on the road," my voice said from behind me, kindly. I did something I don't do often. I listened. By the time I came back into Caldwell's yard, the rain had polished the dry creek to a darker ribbon. The porch steps looked short, the kind of short that is only true if you've been walking for 3 hours. I told myself walking back was smart. If someone came looking for me, they'd check where I was supposed to be first. I told myself I'd wait for the rain to pass and try the truck again. I told myself a lot of simple lies because the complicated truth was not something I wanted to write down yet. I sat in the kitchen with the bucket and watched a drop gather itself at the ragged edge of the stain and fall on a lazy schedule. The house kept its old secrets. I took out my phone, which had given up on the idea of bars but still showed the time, and I typed a message to Amber I couldn't send yet. Might be late tonight. "Truck's acting up. Tell June I'll call before bed." I added a smile face she would not find convincing and deleted it because I didn't want the hollow to hear that tone in me. As the light leaned toward evening, the air inside felt like it had held a family once. I pictured women in aprons and men with dust on their collars, the kind of people who posed for photos without smiling, because film was expensive and the future might not be funny. I realized I hadn't seen family photos on the walls. No faces at all, just square shadows where frames had been, and an oval bruise on the paint where a mirror had hung. I said to the empty house because I couldn't help poking something that had not offered me trouble. "You ever miss your people?" "Miss your people," the hollow said, and there was a pause so long I almost believed I'd gotten away with something. Then from the top of the stairs, where the darkness had become the kind that has elbows, there was the softest answer, "June." I stood so fast the chair complained in a voice it hadn't used since the last time somebody had to tell a child to treat things gently. "No," I said. I didn't whisper it. Whispering is a kind of agreement. I went to the doorway and looked up the stairs. They were steep and painted a green that used to be brighter. The first 3 risers were shiny where feet had learned to lift. Past those, dust held the shape of years. "I don't care what trick you think this is," I said, and my voice did a thing that made me recognize my own father in it. A sound like trying to be larger than you are for someone you love. "You don't say her name." "Don't," came back from the hollow outside, which was possibly worse for how casual it was. "Say her name." The second sentence was tossed like a ball to a child. Then quietly from very near the landing, as if someone had leaned to say it into an ear, "Elijah." I hadn't been Elijah since the summer I was 12, and my mother was mad at me and wanted the syllables to do some of the work of the punishment. Hearing it in that house took me apart in a way that made me feel both light and old. The thing in the hollow wasn't content to catch words. It wanted to check the seams of my name. I did the simplest, dumbest thing then. I went up, one hand on the rail like my father had told me 30 years before. The upstairs smelled like winter clothes that had never been put away. A door on the left was open to a room with a bed whose mattress had given up, and a window that showed me the thin rain's tidy insistence. A door on the right was mostly closed. I pushed it with the back of my fingers like it might bite. The knob turned under my knuckles. The room was small and empty and full of the idea that a crib and a rocker had been there once. I could feel it the way you feel lake air in a house 2 streets back from the shore. A nail in the center of the far wall had a loop of string hanging from it like a question. I touched it. It swiveled quietly, the way things do when they've been hanging in the same spot for so long the air knows its route. On the floor in the dust there were prints, not the careful ovals of boots but the broad collapsed shapes bare feet make when they're grown, but haven't learned they're allowed to be loud. 3 steps crossed the room and then stopped, as if the person who'd made them had turned and lifted and disappeared up into the idea of the roof. The hair on my forearms knew those prints didn't belong to me and knew equally that they did. I backed into the hall. On the stairs, I felt the house's weight lean a little toward me, curious. Halfway down, I heard the front door click, the sound of a latch testing its responsibilities. I made it to the kitchen and stood where I could see the door and the back window at the same time. Rain ticked. The clock over the sink had stopped at some hour that wasn't now. It's funny what gets broken but nobody fixes. When the knock came, it was polite knuckles not too hard. 3 of them. Not the hollow throwing my own noises back at me. This was a person. I opened the door before my sense could have a vote. A man stood on the porch wearing a hat that had seen decades of sun. His face was 40 or maybe a worn 35. The lines around his mouth were the kind you get from holding a cigarette between your lips while you do something with both hands, and don't want to stop for the lighter. He had a clipboard tucked under his elbow and a badge that said County Roads clipped to his shirt above his pocket. His boots were dirty in a way that didn't try to be impressive. He tipped his hat with 2 fingers like a postcard of my grandfather and said, "You the roofer?" "Yes," I said, because that was the simplest truth available. "Name's Larkin," he said. "I got a call about a truck stuck up this way." He looked past me into the kitchen and saw the bucket and the calendar, and didn't let his mind make a shape around them where I could see it. "You got a truck that needs a jump?" "It won't catch," I said. "Battery's fine. Fuel's there." It's like it changed its mind about being a truck. He nodded like that was a thing he'd heard. "Happens in this hollow," he said. Then seeing something in my face that asked the next question without permission, he added, "Not like a joke, like a fact." We walked to my truck. He watched the trees with the same disinterest you give something that can't surprise you anymore. He had the air of a man who believes in nails and shovels, and when he uses those words means the tools and not the hobbies. He tried the ignition. The engine wound up, coughed, and gave him the sad look. He patted the dash with the kind of kindness men give machines because it doesn't cost as much as the other kind. "We'll get her towed out," he said. "Road's soft. Best to do it before dark." I felt the kind of gratitude that looks a lot like relief. He radioed in a tow from a guy named Walt who, by the sound of it, had tow hooks for hands and could get an RV out of a river using only a good mood. Larkin leaned against the porch rail and talked about weather the way men do, which is to say he talked about last year's weather and the time 10 years ago when the creek ran over the bridge like a dare. I liked him. He felt like somebody you wanted to have watched you fail because he'd tell you you'd done the smart thing. "Place sits heavy," he said finally, and he meant the hollow. He said it while staring at the line where the trees stopped saying the word trees and started saying something else. "You don't say its name out loud if you can help it." I didn't ask why. I didn't tell him about the numbers coming back wrong, or my daughter's name laid out like a tool on a workbench. I didn't because I wanted to be a person who could call a tow and leave and have the story end there. Walt arrived in a truck that sounded like it had opinions. He was a big man with a beard that had outlived several of his mistakes. He grinned at me as if we'd fought together once. "Heard you pissed off the road," he said. "It pisses back." "Come on." Between them, the 2 men did a few practical things and my truck got up on the tow and looked like a tired dog on a vet's table. I climbed into Larkin's passenger seat. He told me to grab my bag from the kitchen and lock up. I did. When I closed the door, The house sighed like the week after a funeral when everyone's gone and the casserole dishes are clean and stacked by the sink. I put the key back under the frog's concrete belly, because the world runs on small promises kept. We rode down the road with Walt's truck behind us and the hookup straps flicking water onto my windshield. Larkin kept his eyes forward and his hands 10 and 2. He had the radio on a local station that played gospel that sounded like it had learned to be brave. And a preacher came on between songs and said something about the voice in the wilderness, and I almost laughed. At the second bend, I saw the tin nailed to the tree and looked away before the hollow could make it ring my name. Ever hear your own words come back wrong? I asked Larkin before I could decide not to. He made a face that wasn't exactly a smile. All the time, he said. My ex-wife has a gift. I mean here, I said, and my voice sounded like it realized it had asked the question in front of a cop. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel once. You say a thing in a place enough times, he said finally, and it becomes the shape of a path. Paths like to be walked. He glanced at me. Don't talk in that hollow like you're teaching someone. If you do, you'll have a student you don't want. Is that what happened to you? I asked. Because there are doors you open even with the handle cold in your hand. Something like that, he said. Then he turned up the gospel and we drove. We made it to the county road. The rain had decided to be finished and the air had that scrubbed smell it gets when the sky has done the dishes. We pulled into the gas station with the hot dogs rolling endless miles. The clerk with the lazy eyelid looked relieved to see us, like she'd been counting us, and we finally made her numbers right. Walt unhooked my truck and said he'd get it to the shop and call me when he'd found the simplest solution. He meant it. He was a man who believed in simple solutions like other people believe in chiropractic. I stood in the parking lot with Larkin while he filled out a form with a carbon copy. He handed me the gold sheet. You get a ride home? He asked. I'll call Mason, I said, though my phone was still a brick. He saw me look at it and jerked his chin toward the landline by the lottery tickets inside. The clerk watched us with the friendly suspicion you give men who have tools in their trucks. I called Mason from the counter phone. He picked up with a groan. That dentist owes me flowers, he said. You alive? Yeah, I said. Truck died in that hollow. Towed. I said the name of the hollow quietly, like it was a word with ash in it. He made a sympathetic noise that had a question behind it, and then decided he didn't want the answer. He said he'd come get me. 25 minutes, he said, and somehow made it a promise. I thanked Larkin. He tipped his hat like we'd just concluded a decent contract. He looked at me a long second before he got into his truck. You'll go back, he said. It wasn't a question. When you do, don't measure out loud. I nodded because sometimes saying yes with your head is the only honest thing. He left. Mason arrived with a donut in his mouth. He looked at me like a man checks for fractures after a fall. You all right? Yeah, I said and wasn't sure. Let's go, he drove me home. The floodplain looked pleased with itself, the weeds clean like guests had left. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the baby blue wall where June had taped her spelling words. I called Amber from my good corner of reception. I told her I was fine and I'd call June at bedtime. I said nothing about the echo or the prints or the nail that had risen like a gray snake to listen to me. You don't tell your 8-year-old that the world took your voice and tried it on like a shirt. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday, Walt called. He'd replaced a relay and my truck purred like it remembered being young. He said, "You must have had a gremlin in there." And I said, "Something like that." And we both felt clever for the joke. I told him I'd pick it up Thursday morning early, so I could get back to Caldwell's and put away the last of my mess. He hesitated a second too long and then said, "You want me to drive it out to the mouth?" He meant the mouth of the hollow, like the place where a conversation turns mean. "I'll be fine," I said, because men like me think assurance is cheaper if you give it to yourself. Thursday morning, I swung by the shop and paid Walt in cash and gratitude. He told me to return the gratitude if I ever saw him trying to move a double wide by himself. I promised I would. I stopped at the gas station for a coffee and nodded to the clerk like a brother in a club. Neither of us had wanted to join. Then I drove east and south and turned left at the cairn of River Rock and let the hollow think about me. Two things were different right away. The first was that I knew when the trees leaned it wasn't wind. The second was that I was listening for myself in the wrong places. When I said hey out of habit at the bend where the road has learned to be careful, the echo didn't come back from in front of me. It came from my left up the slope. Slow as someone getting out of a chair. It said hey like we were older men. I kept my mouth shut. Caldwell's house looked the same. The frog guarded his key like an idea that worked. The porch was dry under its sag. The kitchen smelled like the bucket's patience. I put away the tools I'd stacked in a pile under the overhang. I went up on the roof not because I had work to do, but because the roof is where I understand the world. It's where everything reduces to angles you can solve with a pencil. The patch looked good. The caulk had skinned over clean. The nail heads watched the sky like pupils. I stood at the ridge and looked down at the dry creek. The rain had left it a little darker but held back from making it honest. Kudzu had shifted 6 inches up the shed's skeleton in 2 days. The way snow creeps down a mountain when you're not watching. I said nothing. The hollow said nothing back. As I turned to climb down, a sound I'd been waiting for arrived from somewhere below my feet, a shuffle of something heavy that wore clothes. It came from the ravine where the creek runs when the sky has chosen to be loud. It wasn't the dignified noise of a deer testing the idea of a leap. It was a person sound, the weight of boots deciding where to put themselves. I stepped to the edge of the roof and looked down. The ravine is a shallow, wide mouth behind the house, a place that only looks harmless until the first storm fills it like a promise. Kudzu had sent scouts down there, the vines looping and looping until the ground was mostly suggestion. In the middle of that green, somebody had climbed. I didn't see a head or shoulders. I saw the movement of the vines adjusting in a shape that matched a person, like when you drop a cat in the crook of your arm and your shirt learns a new geometry. Don't, I said, because it felt like a command I could own. Don't, said the hollow, and this time the voice was not patient or tired. It was eager. The way a child who has learned a new word says it until the flavor drains out. Don't, it added fast, like laughter starting. Okay, I said out loud to myself and to the thing that was demonstrating its interest. We're done. I went down the ladder without haste because haste makes gravity curious. At the bottom, I unhooked the ladder and carried it like a cross to my truck bed and slid it in. My hands behaved. They didn't tremble. Feet on dirt, hands on aluminum, brain doing math about distance and time. Those are the parts of me I trust. I walked to the porch to get my bag. The door was open a hand's width.
I had not left it like that.
A waft of the upstairs came down, winter clothes and the idea of a crib that had ever watched a moon through that window. The tick of the kitchen clock arrived from a time that was not now. Eli, said my voice from the hall, casual as a Sunday. It was a sound like someone who has known you long enough to be bored by your tricks and has decided to try kindness as a new way to hurt you. I did not step inside. I reached with my arm, long as I could make it, fingers extending like an actor in a silent movie trying to make the audience understand a small thing with too much motion. My fingertips brushed the strap of my bag where it hung on the chair. The bag slid like it had been waiting. It fell and went still in the doorway, like a dog that has been told to stay and is trying its best. I hooked it with my fingers and pulled it to me, and the whole time I kept my weight on the porch board that had a knot I could feel through the sole of my boot. From upstairs, a single footstep. The heel placed gently, an adult trying not to wake a child who is not there. The echo did not repeat it. There are sounds a hollow can't have. There are sounds that belong to the thing living in it. I'm leaving, I said. Leaving, said the hollow, which made it less proof and more promise. As I turned, the nails in the porch rail walked themselves out a hair more, the heads rising like a constellation that had learned to climb. The trees without wind changed the way they stood, as if each had chosen a new angle for the afternoon. In the ravine, the green received the weight of a man without bones. I walked to the truck. I put the key in and turned it. The engine caught like a cough and then stayed caught. The feeling that came over me was not exactly relief. It was recognition, like a friend you forgot you had showed up for you in a room where you did not expect you were allowed to be saved. As I put the truck in gear, the hollow gave me one more gift. It said in my voice but low, with the tiredness of a father who has not had enough of any of the things he needs, don't teach it. I didn't know then whether that was the place trying another shape of trick or some version of me that had left a path for myself to trip over. Either way, I nodded once, like you do when your own advice connects with your bones. I drove out. The road did not lengthen under me the way dreams do when your legs won't work. The culverts stayed where they belonged. The bend with the tin on the tree passed like a page turned without being reread. At the cairn of River Rock, I did not look in the rear view. I did not, because if I saw a shape I would not know whether to go back or drive faster than the part of me that lives in my hands, because it was built to climb. I never went back to finish tidying. I mailed Caldwell a set of pictures of the patch, printed at the drugstore with my card and a note that said if the kitchen leaks again, I'll come when somebody else is there. He sent cash in an envelope and a dog-eared Polaroid of a family on that porch 90 years ago. The man in the photo had my father's mouth and a hat like Larkin's. The child on the step had bare feet and the kind of serious look kids have when they stand where the grown-ups can't help but see them. Since then, it's stayed with me. Not the fear like you think, not the jumping it sounds in the night. It's the way I catch myself about to say a number out loud when I measure a ridge and shut my mouth, because I don't want to lay down a path anywhere. It's the way when I drive a narrow road between two close hills. I listen to my own breathing and make it quiet so I don't leave a copy for something to discover it likes. When June is with me on Fridays, we do homework at the table and I help her test her spelling words. I read the list once and then make her say them herself, softer. She thinks it's because I want her to learn. Maybe it is. Maybe it's because I won't feed anything the shape of her voice. I have not told her about that day. I have not told Amber either, though she watched me that first week like I'd been in a small car wreck I didn't want to admit to. She asked, "You okay? With that care you save for the co-parent you don't live with anymore but still know the weather of." I said yeah and meant I came home. Sometimes I think about calling Larkin and asking him what else he knows. Sometimes I drive past the gas station and see Walt standing there, the hood of some car open like a mouth, and I wave and keep going. I don't put my truck in that hollow's mouth again. Not because I am brave or because I am not. Because I understood something about it that my tools couldn't measure. What I understood is this. There are places in these hills that move like a person. They have habits and they keep score. They are old and patient and petty in the way a neighbor can be petty when you stop saying good morning over a line of hedge. If you teach them, they learn. If you feed them, they will come to your window and knock with the backs of their nails until you are tired enough to let them in. If you say a name in them, they will wear it until it is thin and bring it back to you when you are alone. They will return it dirty and call it love. I haven't hollered down any hollow since then, not when a tire blew on the ridge road. Not when I slid my hand into a nest of hornets under an eave, and the sting crawled up my arm like a hot vine. I do the work quietly. I let numbers live where they are written. I hold June's name like a coin that would buy too much if you spent it wrong. On good days, I think maybe that was all it wanted. A new trick. On bad days, I remember the prints beside mine. The half step ahead, how they turned where I was about to turn. You can lie to yourself about echoes. You can pretend they come from your throat and not from the place that owns your voice once it leaves your mouth. Last week, in a different county, I was patching a church overhang and the preacher came by and asked if the leak was an easy fix, or if God was going to have to help pay for it. We laughed and I told him I'd work with him on the invoice. Then, because old habits are ladders I know how to climb, I called down a measurement before I could stop myself. 4-3, I said. And in the space after the words, a choir in an empty sanctuary waited for a cue. 4-3, the wind said, from nowhere in particular. I finished the job. I shook the preacher's hand. He looked me in the eye and asked if I'd found the work I wanted yet. I said this was it. I meant it. I drove home. June was at her aunt's and I had the Blue House's evening to myself. I made spaghetti badly and ate it at the sink like a bachelor with ambitions. After, I stood in the yard with a beer I didn't finish and listened to the floodplain breathe. It was quiet in a way that put a palm on my chest. A frog said what it has said every night in that ditch since spring found it, and will say until the ditch dries and says it for him. A breeze ran a hand across the grass like it knew a trick for calming people down. A car 2 streets over rolled home slow. The world did its soft work. I wanted to see if I could make something ordinary stay ordinary. I cupped my hands around my mouth and sent a sound into the cheap dark above the floodplain that wasn't a word. It was the kind of note you sing when you're checking your voice in a new place. A small hum with a question at the end. It went up and nothing caught it. It had the kind of quiet landing you want for anything you love. I went inside. I washed my bowl and left it upside down to dry. I set my tape measure on the counter by the sink, blade in, as if I could keep my promises that way. I turned off the kitchen light. From somewhere beyond the blue house, from no hollow in particular, I heard it, a soft sound, a breath shaped into what might have been my note. Only it climbed a half step at the end, like it wanted to see if I'd follow. I stood there in the dark, not answering, and felt the old boards under my feet remember my weight. My father's voice came to sit beside me for a minute, the way voices do when the space around you invites them. "Stay on the road," he said, and didn't tell me which one. I didn't say it back. I didn't teach it. I let the sound fade like a nail sinking flush with one last, careful tap that you feel more than hear, and when it was gone, I didn't move for a long time because I wanted the night to forget I was there before I reminded it. I never meant to write anything like this, and if you knew me in real life, you'd probably laugh at the idea of me posting a story to the internet instead of filing a maintenance report like a normal person. But that's the problem, the report doesn't fit this. I tried. I opened the template we use for incidents, weather, trail damage, illegal fire rings, and my hands just stopped on the keyboard because none of the drop-downs had a place for this. The only reason I'm putting it here is that writing it feels like the only way to get it out of my head long enough to sleep. If this ends up sounding like one of those late-night campfire stories, please understand that I'm trying to stay grounded. Names are real, dates are real, the place is real. I wish the rest wasn't. My name is Nova. Last summer, I was a temp with a park maintenance crew along the Blue Ridge Parkway, mostly around graveyard fields and Black Balsam Knob. It's the part of the parkway with those rounded, grassy balds where the trail goes up above the tree line and the wind never stops. We spent a lot of days reblazing trees, pulling invasive plants, hauling out trash after weekend traffic, and sometimes, when our supervisor liked us and paperwork was light, we'd do side jobs for the rangers on overtime. The side jobs were usually dull, looking for illegal campfire rings or picking up drone fragments after a burn. Not because the drones caused the fires, but because people like to fly over the smoke and then crash their toys into the hazard area. There's a culture of treating the balds like a dirt bike track for everything with a battery. It makes maintenance people cynical. Tripp was the other temp that summer. He's one of those guys who collects hobbies like wristbands. He had a climbing harness in his trunk next to a mushroom identification guide and a tackle box. Big grin, easy charm, and just enough actual skill to handle a chainsaw without losing a leg. We were paired a lot because I'm quiet and boring and he's loud, and the supervisors figured we balanced out. I liked him in a way because he worked hard and didn't try to be my best friend. He did insist that we keep a shared playlist on his phone for night runs, which is what he called it when we did late shifts after the park formally closed. Less traffic, fewer tourists asking about waterfalls. More stars too if the sky cooperated. This happened on a Wednesday night in early August. There had been a lightning-caused fire 2 ridges over the previous weekend. Not a big one, just a smear of scorched shrubs that the rain finally put out. But the rangers asked if we'd sweep the knobs anyway, looking for any smoldering spots and collecting debris. They offered double overtime pay if we did it after hours, when the sky would be clear enough to spot a glow. Yeah, I know. Extra money is a stupid reason to go walking after dark into a place famous for fog and sudden weather. But we had radios, a GPS unit, and I had hiked that loop a ridiculous number of times. The worst thing I anticipated was stepping in a false route and twisting an ankle. I was wrong about what worst could look like. We left the maintenance lot around 8:30 and started up from the Black Balsam trailhead a little before 9. The red aviation lights on the radio tower blinked through a low smear of cloud, and the last of the day hikers were coming down with headlamps. I recognized a couple of regulars, an older couple who always picked blueberries until their hands turned purple, and a trail runner who did the loop in a windbreaker with his dog 9 times a week because he liked to throw numbers around. He gave us a 2-finger salute as he passed and said we had the mountain to ourselves. That felt like a blessing when he said it. The ridge was quiet. You know how sound carries up there? Even a zipper can sound sharp as a twig snapping when the air is damp enough. We kept our voices soft and our headlamps angled down. The fog wasn't down yet. The stars were starting to show and everything had that hush the balds get between sunset and dark. The grass shivered. A night bird made a corkscrew sound like it was unwinding itself. I could smell the cold sweetness of the heath and the sour black scent where someone had put a fire out with a boot. We flagged a stump that might have been smoldering and moved on. About a mile in, we pulled off the main line and took the narrow wiregrass path bumping toward the art lobe. There's a spot where it slips between blueberry thickets and dips a little, And when you climb back out, you can see the spine of the ridge and the soft rise of the next bald in front of you. That's where the first light appeared. It was below the horizon line. I don't mean down in a valley. I mean the ridge rolled away the way a wave does, and there was nothing behind it but sky. But there, just under the rim of the hill where nothing should be, hung this cold, steady glow. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a headlamp. It wasn't moving fast enough to be a drone, and it wasn't warm enough to be a lantern. It looked like a hospital light turned down to half brightness, hovering with no point of reference. It made my eyes water a little to look at it directly, like staring at a piece of stainless steel under fluorescent bulbs. "Do you see that?" Tripp said, already stopping. He was the guy who pointed out meteors and satellites. I didn't need him to ask. "It's too low," I said. "It's below the edge," he said, like that made any kind of sense. He clicked his headlamp off and the world deepened. The light hung there by itself without a halo of moisture or beam. It just existed, an idea of a light, and then another one came on to the right of it. Not a twin, not a pattern exactly, just another spot of precision in the wrong place. We stood there longer than we should have. Our breath sounded bigger than we were. Tripp laughed once, that humorless exhale you make when something is so weird you want to pretend you're cool with it, so it does not become a problem. He unclipped the radio from his shoulder and keyed it. "Greenback, you copy?" he said to the ranger station. Static, then a drone of distant weather and the thin bounce of someone else speaking far down the band. He tried again. I watched the radio's channel number flicker like it was trying to blink. He lowered the radio and shrugged at me like no signal happened sometimes. I pulled my phone and checked bars, 2 bars, but when I hit the compass app to get a bearing, the elevation readout glitched, flickered, and climbed from 6,132 feet to 6,198, then 6,213, then back down to 6,150. It looked drunk. I didn't like that. The second light drifted left and dipped. The first one fatted out like a balloon trying to become a circle. That was the moment my scalp tightened. Not like fear, but like my body had figured something out and my brain hadn't. It was wrong in a way that didn't announce itself. I had the ridiculous thought that something was scanning with the world as the screen. Finding nothing and resetting, scanning again, drifting, patiently filling a grid. We started walking again because standing still made my heart beat like a rabbit's and moving felt like control. The plan was to stay on the trail and do our little sweep, make a note for the morning about weird lights and bad radio, and be back at the truck by midnight with our pay bumps justified. The lights kept us in the corner of my eye. Over the next 15 minutes, they multiplied. Not a quick swarm, but a slow proliferation. One would disappear, and 2 would appear farther along the rim where there was no rim to stand behind. They were always below the edge and they never once cast a shadow. The headlamps did. The stars did. Even the weak glow of the tower would throw a blade of shadow against the fog. The lights made nothing. It was like they bleached the idea of shade out of the world. Our trail blazes. Those white rectangles we paint on the trees looked dimmer when a light hovered near. I rubbed at one with my thumb as we passed and came away with nothing on my skin. But the painted white looked gray now, as if a film had grown over it. "Maybe search and rescue?" Tripp said. "Drones?" He wanted a mechanism. I did too. "Explain it and you can cope." "They'd radio first," I said. "They wouldn't run silent out here." "We're running silent," he said. He tried greenback again and got the same empty weather noise, like a thin wind in a sealed house. He grinned at me over the radio like he was reassuring me, but also himself. "Let's get to the shoulder." Look from higher up, we climbed. The trail on Black Balsam is smooth stone and trampled grass, a bare ribbon when you're above the trees. The fog lifted with us, then thinned, then was gone, like stepping up through a floor. The stars were perfect. I could hear the highway in the far distance, that ocean hush with a cough of engine changing lanes. Tripp turned his head to tell me something, then stopped. I stopped too. I didn't have to ask. The lights were closer. You know that thing your brain does with bright objects at night where it tries to tell you how far something is by how it looks, and then you get fooled because you've got no depth cues? This wasn't that. These were closer because they reflected off the wet sheen on rocks, and there is no arguing with the way light plays on stone. One of them slid not above us, not below us, but parallel with our level, like a lantern carried by someone walking a path just off to our left, just over the hill, like there was a second trail laid half a foot outside reality. It moved without bobbing. It moved with that patient clinical steadiness. Every inch of me prickled. "All right," Tripp said, and his voice had gone into the register he used when someone's dog off-leash got too interested in his ankles.
All right, hey, hello.
He called out like he expected someone to answer. I would have said don't, but the rule about not shouting at strange things felt like a superstition right then, and superstitions only protect you if you believe in them, which I didn't. He shouted again a little louder, and the radio on his shoulder hissed long and low like breath over glass. Not feedback. Not the sharp pop of an incoming transmission. It had depth, a thing moving along a coil. The lights did not react. The one to our left drifted forward, paused in a way that made me imagine a person stopping to look at a map, then eased away again, carving a line only it could see. We walked, not fast. I don't know why that matters in the retelling, but it does. Run and you admit something is chasing you. We weren't being chased. We were being included. The way road cones include you in a detour. We reached a spot where the trail crosses a flat of exposed stone and splits. One route hairpins to the right and drops toward the trees. The other keeps to the ridge. There's a scatter of shaved bedrock there, and a deadfall where someone once posed their golden retriever and put it on Instagram with a quote about freedom. I can picture the dog's expression more clearly than I can picture my own face from that night. It's a stupid detail, but it's the kind of thing your brain hooks onto when everything else gets slippery. We took the ridgeline. The lights thickened. Some slid low like skaters dropping a knee. Some hovered one above the other as if they were stacked. And then we reached the place where the trail blazes stopped being blazes at all. We paint them knee-high on tree trunks and sometimes on rocks. They're simple white rectangles bright enough to catch in a beam. We'd refreshed them a month earlier. We came around a curve and the next three were gray as old bone. I stopped and ran my glove over the first one. The paint was there. It was solid under my fingers. It just wasn't white anymore. Touching it made the top layer flake into powder. Under it was fine. The top had been cooked or leached or washed with something that drank color. The next two were the same. Within the same 20 feet, the blazes beyond were sharp and bright as if they'd been painted an hour ago. It was wrong enough to say so out loud, which I did. I don't remember what words I used. Okay, Tripp said, slow. He looked beyond me like he expected to see a crew with ladders hiding in the blueberry thickets. But there were just those lights, floating along the absence where a cliff would be if the mountain had that shape. He put the radio back to his mouth, and this time he didn't call Greenback. He called me. Nova, you copy, he said in this bad imitation of official tone, which was his way of saying, I need you to be normal with me. Copy, I said, because routines are rafts. Static answered us under our words. The static sounded like rain on a metal roof while thunder holds its breath. We walked on. The fog rolled in during the next stretch, not a curtain but a thickening that got into your hair and eyelashes before your lungs noticed. The light stayed exactly as bright through it. I could see my own headlamp halo shrink, diluted. The cold lights kept their edges. They drifted ahead, went still, and then the path, without us realizing we'd strayed, became mossy and soft underfoot. I realized it when my boots sank into mud where there should have been rock. I yanked my foot back and the mud came away in strings like the top of a marsh, ropey and wrong. Tripp swung his beam down and said, No, 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 under his breath like he was trying to edit reality by narrating it. We backtracked. We found rock again. I told myself we'd veered a yard off to the left toward the wet spot that always forms near the blueberry ring. Except there is no wet spot on that part of the ridge. There's nothing but stone and fern and the bare sweep of grass. I didn't correct myself out loud. I didn't need to get in an argument with my own brain and lose. That was when we heard voices. It was a murmur at first, like two people talking in a tent a field away. I couldn't make words. I could tell there were pauses and responses. Long strands of sound, then silence that tasted like a held breath, then a reply. It came from ahead and to the left where the lights had pooled. Tripp lifted his head. He did the thing we all do, which is to imagine the faces that go with the voices, and he did it so confidently that his posture shifted from cautious to friendly. I swear he got taller. Hey, he called. Y'all okay? Hey. We're maintenance, park staff. He always said we were staff because it made him feel 20% more official. The voices broke into and out of the wind if it was wind. This is where my memory tilts. I want to say there was no wind at all. I remember being aware of my hair lying still, but sound doesn't travel like that without air moving. And yet there we were, getting these neat little packets of speech as if they were being handed to us in paper cups. The lights clustered. One slid toward us with this terrible calm. My headlamp dimmed on its own, and with it, the white stripe on a trail post went gray. I turned to say we should stop, no, to say his name. Just to hear it, because something in the way he was breathing had changed and there was no reply. He was 3 steps behind me. He wasn't there. I don't mean he vanished in a puff of spooky smoke. We had been walking together, and then in the space it takes to think I'm thirsty, there was space behind me where he had been, and then a little farther back than that, and then too far back. I moved my light across the ridge, and it caught the trunk of a stunted birch, caught the flare of a spider's eye, caught nothing shaped like a person. The voices slid around to the right as if they were a group pivoting on a heel. "Trip," I said. I didn't yell. That name came out like a prayer you don't admit you know. I tried the radio. I heard my own breath. The hiss rose and fell with me like we were sharing a lung. I took 1 step forward because stepping backward felt like choosing something. And the light in front of me went wider, fatter. A circle searching, and the trail blazes on either side of me paled as if the paint remembered that it could fade all at once. "Nova," he said, and his voice came sharp and bright from somewhere to my right. "Over here." "I'm good, just, hey, yeah, hang on, I'm good." And the second half of that wasn't to me. It was the tone you use when a stranger starts asking for help on the side of the road, and you want them to know you're human. I cut right without making a plan. The grass whispered up to my knees. The fog bit into my mouth cold as metal. The lights didn't follow. They held where they were, burning without heat. And I moved crosswise out of their circle into something softer that still didn't feel like natural dark. There was a slick smear of soot on the stone. I saw it with my lamp at a slant because I learned that trick from the crew leader, who taught me to look for illegal fire rings. Low angle picks up what you'd miss. The soot made a perfect oval at the edge of a shallow depression, as if someone had tipped a can of ash there and rubbed it flat with a gloved hand. A few feet farther on, there was another oval. Between them, boot prints doubled over themselves until they made something like a figure 8. They weren't crisp because the moss took impressions like a pudding does, edges soft. But the whole whisper of a pattern was burned in. Not charcoal, burned. The moss around the prints was the unhealthy yellow-brown of grass that's been too close to a grill. I don't know how you burn moss without fire. I didn't want to find out. Again, his voice, "Yeah, I hear you. No, we can't, no, hang on." Lighter, like he was trying to be polite. Closer. But I couldn't make the direction line up with what my eyes told me. People say that about owls in foggy woods, that the direction of the voice is hard to locate. This wasn't that. This was a GPS arrow that keeps rotating even while you stand still. "Trip," I said louder. "Say my name." Nothing. Then from behind me and a little too far to the right, he said, "Nova," like a person remembering the answer to a security question. It made the skin of my face feel too small. I angled toward it anyway because considering the alternative made something in me want to sit down and put my head in my hands. I told myself that if this was a prank, it had gone well beyond funny, and I would accept that later, after I found him and made him look me in the eyes. The next oval of ash had a slightly darker smear at one edge where the burn had gone deeper and lifted the soil into a scab. The boot prints within it looped and crossed their own paths like a child practicing a cursive letter. I tried to tell myself that 2 people had met here and paced a while. I don't know why I wanted it to be 2 people. 1 person walking in circles would have been easier, but 2 felt less like a ghost and more like an argument. The voices rose. They weren't in English now. Not every sound in the world is a language. Some sounds are the shape of people trying to be kind without words. That's what it reminded me of. A ranger kneeling next to an injured hiker and saying the soft syllables that prepare you for pain, even if you don't share a vocabulary. The lights behind me pushed their blank cold across my shoulders. My headlamp dimmed another shade. My phone buzzed in my pocket even though I hadn't felt the cold numbness that means a message came in. It buzzed again. I pulled it out and saw the screen flicker between a battery percentage that was false. It couldn't drop from 80 to 32 in an hour. And the elevation readout sliding not just up, but down. When you walk uphill, numbers rise. When you walk down, numbers fall. I stood on a ridge, barely moving, and the number climbed, stuck, swung down like a pendulum, then climbed again. It felt like the mountain was finding its measure and deciding to be taller. I aimed the beam down at my boots and watched the moss smoke. It didn't throw visible smoke like a cigarette. It breathed like the exhale you see when the air is cold and your body is warm. The figure 8 pattern, The burnt loops of footsteps made my breath shorten. That's when I smelled it, not smoke exactly. A sterile odor, the way a hospital hallway smells after someone mops it, that flat, damp linen smell. It didn't belong here. This place should smell like earth. The only synthetic smell at night should be your own pack straps. I followed the ring of ash around and felt stupid because there's no reason to circle a circle. It made me want to walk the loop, to follow it 2-3 times. I took half a step and then stopped because the idea felt less like mine and more like a suggestion pressed into my head with someone's thumb. "Nova," said a voice at my left ear. Not Trip, not anyone I knew. The tone was gentle and so close I flinched and lost my footing, and put a hand out and caught myself on the rim of the burned ring. My glove came away smeared with a shadow that didn't color my skin. It colored the glove, and I couldn't scrub it away on the grass. The light to my right swelled like a breath taken. The blazes on a trail post directly ahead turned the color of old paste. "I'm right here," Trip said. From some astonishing distance I could not see. "I'm good." "I'm good." Then lower. "I'm with them." That's how he said it. "I'm with them the way you'd say I'm with the crew, don't wait up." And that made something in my chest pull tight the way you pull straps on a pack when you're about to shoulder it for a climb you didn't prepare for. I had the hot, petty thought that he was leaving me to finish the job, and I know how that sounds, but whoever you are, you will be human, no matter what you're looking at. I turned in a full ugly circle, headlamp slicing over scrub and rock. I tripped over my own boot and landed on my knee hard enough to bite the inside of my cheek. That dumb, real pain may have saved me, because it put my body back in the present. The voices went quiet as if someone had pressed a finger to a mouth. My radio hissed gently. The lights ahead drifted very slightly apart from each other, like a search line widening. They weren't looking at me, but the mountain is not a corridor. And yet I understood that they were not going to let me pass through the place they stood. I don't know how you understand things like that. It's not logic. It's not fear. It's that slow, unpleasant recognition the body has when it meets a rule it can't disobey. I did the thing that I am not proud of. I did not go through them. I left the ridge. I cut right, diagonal toward the suggestion of trees. Because if I put trunks between me and that clean brightness, I thought maybe the world would start taking shadows again. I moved with this careful, ugly speed that puts every step exactly where you can see it go. And the grass hissed, and the fog closed around my throat and ears, and the lights glowed on without strain. The voices did not try to stop me. Trip did not call me by name again. I don't remember how long I moved like that. I remember the little mechanical decisions a person makes in the dark. Move the beam ahead of your foot. Try to glance without pointing the light exactly where you don't want to see anything. The ground under my boots grew firmer. The air warmed by a degree. That sounds dramatic, but you can tell. The tiny hairs on your forearms change their angle. I hit a skirt of trees and the world got close again. Leaves whispered in a language I speak. I found a scar of mud in a place mud shouldn't exist and stepped around it this time without testing it. Like stepping over a boundary you must not cross. I saw a flicker of reflective tape and almost cried with relief. We put those on posts sometimes where the blazes wear off. I went to it like it was a mirror and I was checking my own face. The tape cut back toward the trailhead. The stars disappeared behind fog. The radio on my shoulder made a sound like a coin dropped on marble. It startled me so badly I laughed, then clapped my hand over my mouth because laughter seemed like it might call attention. I walked. I kept walking until the hush of traffic got louder, and the thin, cool smell of engine exhaust mixed with the wild smells and told me I'd crossed back into a world with rules I understood. And then I finally let myself stop. I stopped at the side of the lot where the gravel meets grass. I could see the truck's shape in the dark. I leaned against the hood and listened until my breathing lined up with the rise and fall of the road, and then I keyed the radio for Greenback and tried again. This time somebody answered. He sounded like he'd been listening to static for a long time. "Greenback," he said. "Who's on the ridge?" I said my name. I said Trip's name. It came out gratefully automatic. I said we had eyes on strange lights, elevation glitches, gray blazes, and a voice like a person standing next to me. He said to hold tight and that help was on the way, which is a big phrase to use when we were a 15-minute walk from the lot. The reality of how silly that sounded made me want to put my head down on the truck and weep. 2 Rangers rolled up in less than 10 minutes, which means they'd been nearby. There were no sirens because you don't do that up there. The older one was a woman who'd been there for a decade and could tell you which trailhead had produced the most awkward first dates. The younger one was new and trying to conduct the scene like he'd trained for it. They were both kind. They shined their lights down the trail politely the way cops point their beams past your eyes. The older one asked what we'd seen. I told her as plainly as I could, stopping when I realized too many words made it sound like a camp story and fewer would make it sound like a lie. I remember telling her about the blazes more than the voices because the blazes were physical. "What about your partner?" she asked, and I hated that she used the word partner because that was a bigger word than the guy they paired me with on the schedule. I told her the two last things Tripp said. I didn't look at her eyes when I said the second one. She nodded and didn't write anything down. They did a quick sweep with me alongside. I didn't want to be on the ridge again, but I didn't want to let them go without me either. The trail looked like itself. The blazes were white, a little chipped where I'd flaked that first one with my glove. The fog hauled itself around like a tired blanket. The lights, those cold, searching lights, were gone, just gone. We went as far as the flat rock where the trail splits. The older ranger made a small sound like recognizing a face in a crowd. She crouched by the ground where the mud had no business being and touched the edge of it with the back of her hand. Then she looked up at me and said very calmly, "You're sure your partner wasn't with you here?" "He was," I said. And then he wasn't. The younger ranger keyed his radio and spoke in a low, efficient voice I tried not to be angry at. We went a little farther and then she turned me around and took me back to the lot while he kept talking into the band. "We'll keep looking," she said, and she said it like it was a fact. She sat me on the tailgate of the truck I'd leaned on earlier and handed me water. She asked if I wanted to call anyone. I didn't. Who? What would I say? They called it after 2 hours. It's a big banner to roll up. We'll resume at first light, but that's what they did. They gave me the choice to stay or go home. I didn't want to be elsewhere. Leaving would have meant abandoning the one place he might walk back to. I was not brave. I just had my idea of what a perimeter looked like. I slept in the cab with the seat reclined and the radio turned so low it might as well have been a heartbeat. I slept badly, which feels like bragging, but I need you to know that I did sleep, because the rest of this can sound like a fever. The sun comes up late on the parkway in the summer. Not literally, but the fog holds the light like a dimmed lamp. The rangers were back with more people and they swept again, and I walked with them because sitting felt worse. We found places where feet had been. Not fresh, not crisp, just the suggestion of traffic that could have been ours. We did not find the dim rings I had seen. We did not find any sign of burned moss. The older ranger stopped twice in different places, then stood very still and closed her eyes and opened them and told me to drink more water. It felt like a prayer. I drank. At 9, a federal-looking guy showed up with the kind of clip-on badge that tries to apologize for itself by being shiny. He spoke like a person who'd briefed many people before. He had a cardboard envelope with him. He said they were collecting all photos anyone might have taken and any debris from the fire area, and would I please step into the shade and look at a couple of prints developed from evidence collected on the ridge. That phrase, developed from evidence, was so careful it made me want to laugh again, at the exact wrong time. I stood under a sourwood tree and he slid a glossy sheet out of an archival sleeve with both hands the way you handle something that's still a little hot. The photo looked like something a tourist would send their mom. A person in a field of burned heath, the earth charred so black it glittered, the sky pewter dull with cloud. The person was me. I wore my rain shell and my cheap ball cap and my work pants with the frayed pocket. My head was turned because I hate cameras and always look away at the last second. Behind me, across the slope, was a black oval of ash the size of a living room rug. And beyond it, another oval. And between them, the suggestion of tracks, faint. Because once something burns, it doesn't have footprints, it just has hints. In the distance, dim and small the way distance makes everything polite, a line of lights hung low below the horizon line. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd think it was a trick of glare. The rangers had not been on that slope last night. There had been no fire there. We were standing on the other side of the loop. The hillside should have looked like it always does in August, with scrub fighting its way up through old ash and tufted grass lean as ribs. It did, I could turn my head and see it, but the photo held a future like a penny held in a palm. From when? I asked, because that was the only part of the grammar my brain could get at. I don't think that made sense to him. He didn't answer. He slid the photo back into the sleeve and asked if I'd mind giving a statement in more detail about the lights. The older ranger, God bless her steady hands, put her body between us very slightly and said, "We will. Later." We never found Tripp in any way that matters for a narrative like this. That's the part of the story that makes people tilt their heads at me in the weeks and months after, when I tried to tell it without sounding like a haunted house. The official thing that happened is ongoing search, no conclusive outcome. I learned new phrases like closure and event window and residual search pattern because once you've been in a weird enough situation, a stack of white words is the only way professionals can keep the world from buckling. I kept working that season. I asked for daylight shifts near water where echoes get swallowed in waterfalls. I didn't hike the ridge at night. I didn't go near the balds on Wednesdays. I didn't read missing person posters if I could help it, because the faces looked like anyone who'd ever said yes to a little overtime and trusted the outline of a mountain more than their own fear. Other things changed. The trail blazes stayed white and bright where we had refreshed them. But sometimes I would walk a section and feel my eyes slide off the paint like oil on glass. When that happened, I touched the tree. Feeling the texture of bark under my palm gave me something to argue with. We pulled 2 crashed drones that month. Brittle plastic fused into shapes he'd had invented. I kept the glove with the ash stain in my locker because there's something you hold on to when you can't hold on to anything else. It still looked smudged. It smelled like a hospital floor on a rainy day. It made me want to scrub my skin until it hurt. The last thing I'll tell you is small, and maybe it's the thing that will make this sound like a story instead of an incident. But I need to put it here. 2 weeks after that night, on a Sunday morning, a family stopped me near the restrooms at a picnic area. The dad held a map. The mom had a nervous smile. The kid had a stick and a scab on his knee and that wide-eyed bravery you put on when you've cried in front of strangers. They'd gone out on the loop early before sunrise to watch the clouds burn off. They'd heard voices up on the ridge calling names like a roll call in fog. It was comforting, the mom said, not sure she should say that. Like they knew who they were looking for. When they turned back because the kid got cold, they'd seen the fog hand them back their own shapes, like a mirror trying to do a good job. "What names?" I asked because it's a reflex. Ask the human questions before your brain tells stories. The kid beat them to it. He said, one of them sounded like try, and he garbled the last syllable by accident and then tried again, Ernest.
Tripp, he said, like you do when you're telling on yourself.
I thanked them and showed them the turn for the lower loop and told myself, kids pick up names from adults without understanding they've done it. The dad folded the map and apologized for something that wasn't his fault. I finished my contract in September and didn't renew. I told the guys at the lot it was family stuff. Nobody pushed. The older ranger hugged me the day I turned my badge in, which surprised us both. Her hair smelled like smoke and pine. She said almost in my ear like a person speaking softly to an injured hiker, sometimes the rescue is the event. And if that sounds like a thing she said before, maybe it is, and maybe that should trouble you. I live farther down the ridge now, near a different town with a different kind of fog. I still hike, but I pick trails with more trees than sky. I still wake up on Wednesday nights, sometimes right before 2 in the morning, with the taste of sterile air in my mouth. I don't check my elevation anymore. That app is gone. When I drive the parkway and pass the turnout for Black Balsam, I do not look up at the ridgeline. I do not look for lights. I know exactly where they would be if I let myself see them, pinned just below the edge, steady as a rule written on a wall. I keep my eyes on the asphalt. If I hear a voice say my name in a tone that expects me to be polite, I turn the radio up 1 notch and pretend it's the weather. If this ends up getting read by someone who knows those trails, I'm sorry for how it might ruin your next night hike. Maybe you'll go up and see nothing. Maybe you'll go up and see the same sky everybody else does when the air clears and the tower blinks red through cloud. You'll see the blazes bright and clean and your light will make shadows like it should. If, for whatever reason, you go up there and your headlamp dims for a breath and a glow appears where there's nothing for it to reflect off of, and the white paint on the post ahead looks like someone dusted it with ash, and you hear your own radio use your breath to make a sound you didn't choose, please don't try to be good. Don't try to be brave. Come back down exactly the way you went up, and when you get to your truck, put your head on the hood for a minute and listen to your own heartbeat in the cool metal. And do not look at the photos anyone offers you until you have someplace you can set them down in a drawer and forget, at least until morning. I don't think those lights are a warning or a weapon. I think they are a habit the mountain learned, or a habit someone taught it, and like all habits, they don't know who you are. They aren't hunting. They are looking because that is what they do. And if you step into their pattern, they will include you, like a rescue that starts before you are lost, like a photograph developed from evidence that hasn't happened yet. Sometimes people ask me, usually if they've had 2 drinks, what I think the lights were looking for. I say I don't know and it's true, but that isn't the same as having no idea. A part of me thinks they're looking for the thing that will stop them from looking. That is not the kind of thing a person can hand over. And if you hear someone say your name up there, and for a second it sounds like a friend, and for a second it sounds like a stranger, and for a second it sounds like your own voice, I think the only true answer is to say nothing at all and keep walking. Because the mountain will not argue, and the lights will not apologize, and the rescue will not arrive in a way you can point to on a map. I'm writing this to remind myself of that. I'm writing this because even now on some nights, I dream of a ring of ash where footsteps practice the same loop over and over until they are burned in. And I dream of turning around to tell someone I'm with them, and the name I say in the dream is my own. I never thought a mountain could keep score, but that's the only way I can make sense of what happened on those nights I ran the switchbacks. I'm writing this because I haven't been sleeping, and it's better to pour it out than keep rerunning the same turns in my head. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. Believe it or don't, I just need this out of my system before I take the route again and the road decides it wants a different kind of payment. My name is Kane. I drive nights for a courier that saves money by sending one guy to hit everything the bigger companies don't want. Medical samples that have to cross county lines, boxes of parts for ski lifts, envelopes that would cost more to overnight than the contracts inside are worth. The route isn't long as the crow flies, but crows don't need to respect grade or ice or a cliff that eats radio signals. I start in a valley town called Allerton at 6 p.m., load my van while the day drivers swap lies over cigarettes, and then I climb into the mountains, peaking by midnight, dropping down into Mid-Pine for a gas station stop, then pushing through the fog to a cluster of motels and cabins, then back again, reversing the whole thing until the odometer tells the story my body already knows. I've been doing it long enough that I can tell you which guardrail posts are bent in and which have names carved into them. And I know exactly where my tires rumble, even if I have a podcast or the radio too loud. Why do it? Because I'm good at it. Because the money isn't terrible if you pretend sleep is optional. And because the judge doesn't care if you don't like your ex's new boyfriend. He cares if the child support clears. I have a son who's 9 and actually thinks the van is cool. And when I have him on weekends, we sit in it in the driveway and eat breakfast sandwiches I heat up on the dash. He traces routes on the state map with his finger like we're explorers. I told him once that roads are like rivers, always looking for the lowest place. He told me rivers are like roads for fish. This is the kind of explanation I want to be around to give him when he's older. Simple, true, and useful. That's part of why I kept the route even when my back spasmed and my hands shook from caffeine. You pick your martyrdoms in this life. You mind your ledger. The first time I saw the other me, I'd been awake for 21 hours. There was rain where there shouldn't have been rain. It likes to gather in bowls up there, sudden little storms that slip down between the ridges and hang. The spray keeps your high beams honest. It was close to 2 in the morning. I remember the clock because it glowed 1:57 when I passed the runaway truck ramp, and that means I'd be hitting the hairpins around 2:10 if I didn't ride the brakes too much. My van was full of cardboard the color of oatmeal and a styrofoam cooler that said lab in red marker. I had the fan up high to blow the windshield clear because the defroster is only strong on one side. I could smell wet pine and the sour milk stink that lives in the vans. Carpet from a spill 3 drivers ago. Rounded the bend into the first switchback and my headlights. Found a man standing at the white line, waving one arm like he was trying to flag down a cab. Drivers see a lot of strange. You learn to slow first and think later. So I eased off, hard up, foot hovering in case he jumped back. He wore a jacket like mine, the same company logo under fluorescent smear. He stood beside a disabled van that looked like mine except somehow flatter, like when your phone camera glitches and compresses. The back door on his was open, swinging slightly, a white rectangle in the bright wash. Rain bounced on the asphalt. He was soaked. He had his head tilted just so, waiting for me to see his face. I did see his face. It was my face. Same widow's peak. Same badly healed nick on the cheek from sliding under a trailer in my 20s. He looked like a mirror, but tired in a way that wasn't just lack of sleep. I didn't scream, I didn't slam anything, I didn't go off the side. What I did was the cautious driver's version of panic. I braked harder than was smart and gave the wheel a small jerk because instinct said don't hit him, even if he's you. My van skated a quarter turn toward the open edge. The guardrail posts looked thin, like drinking straws. My tires chirped. I got control because I know that curve like I know the line on my palm. In that moment, the other me lowered his arm like he was satisfied. I accelerated past him and his squashed van and the swinging door that never banged because there was no sound from that side, only from mine, wipers, fan, my breath in the caverns of the cab. In the rear view, I saw a smear of white like a ghosted afterimage, and then it was gone. I pulled over at the turnout half a mile up, right where the rock face sweats even in winter. I sat shaking. I was cold but sweating, a stupid trick the body plays when it thinks it almost died. I turned the radio down, then up, then off, which is a good way to test if you're crazy. The engine idled and I couldn't stand that either, so I killed it, instantly regretted the silence, and turned it back on. I told myself the obvious. A random guy looks like you in the rain when the light is bad. My brain said maybe you were looking at your own reflection in the windshield. I knew neither of those was right. I also knew I wasn't going to be the man who got out of the van and walked back into the fog to check. I called my dispatcher, a woman named Luz who wears her hair in a braid so tight it looks like iron cable and drinks coffee from a thermos that would serve as a weapon if needed. She answered on the second ring because she always does. "You good?" she asked, voice crackling. Sometimes the mountain chews the call like jerky. I just almost hit somebody. At the first switchback. "You got a breakdown reported?" "Not tonight," she said. "You sure it wasn't a deer?" "A deer will upright itself at the last second and look like a person. You need me to call highway?" "It was a person," I said. I didn't want to say the rest. He looked like... forget it. He looked like he needed help. "You didn't stop." "No," I said. He was right at the line. He was waving. Silence shaped itself around the line. I could picture her scanning the board, tapping the pen. "If he's still there on your way back, I'll call it in." "You need me to keep you on the line?" "I'm okay," I said. "Thanks." I forced a laugh that didn't sound like me. "If I hit anything, I'll ring." "Do that," she said. "Keep it upright, Kane." I hung up and sat until the windshield fogged because my weak defroster couldn't keep up with my breathing. Then I pulled back into gear. I didn't see him again that night. I told myself I'd imagined the specifics because I needed to imagine a story. Brains are good at that. You have one weird flash, and 5 minutes later you've told yourself why it happened, and the part of you that needs meaning eats the explanation like sugar. I made it to Mid-Pine. Bought coffee so hot it tasted like metal from a cashier with a swollen lip who told me it was allergies, and then I finished the route. Dawn took my shoulders down in the way dawn does. The fog peeled off in sheets and the road looked like a road again. It's astonishing how quickly terror looks like your own gullibility when the sun arrives. On the way back up that morning, I scanned the shoulder for any hint of an accident. There was nothing. No paint marks, no scuffs, no wet footprints because the drizzle had stopped before the gusts, and the gusts had dried the place before memory could stick. When you're tired, you learn to accept clean slates. I slept 4 hours and woke up on my couch with an ache between my eyes like someone pressing 2 thumbs there. My ex, Mara, texted around noon to ask if I could take our son, Evan, to the hardware store on Saturday so he could pick out a tool belt from the kids section. I said yes. She answered with an emoji that looked like her polite smile. When we're on, we're almost friends. When we're off, we talk through lawyers and calendars. She used to love the mountains, but the winter a kid slid off a pullout and died, she decided we should move. I wasn't ready, and the rest of that story is furniture division and long drop-offs. By the second night, I had convinced myself I'd be disappointed if nothing strange happened. That's a thing, too. Once you've seen the coin disappear, you want the magician to do it again. I went up like normal. The weather behaved. The radio gave me a host arguing with a trucker about parking. I ate one sandwich too fast and hiccuped until the crest. Everything looked right enough that I got mad at myself for hoping something would be wrong. He was back at 2:10 on the dot. Same jacket, same posture, same wet hair, even though it wasn't raining. This time he wasn't at the first switchback. He was at the second, tighter one where the drop is longer and the scrub grows at a slant like it's trying to reach your window. He raised his arm again and dropped it in the same satisfied way when I braked too hard. When my tires caught, I cussed loud enough to fog the cab. I drove past without looking directly at his face. In the mirror, he was already gone. I didn't call Luz. The third night, he was at the third switchback, closer to the line than before, like he trusted me to choose him over the cliff. The road liked symmetry. The hairpins come in a certain rhythm and you learn it like a drum fill. He was keeping time with me now, shifting forward one beat each night, inch by inch, toward the place where my hands always feel heavier on the wheel. Sleep makes room for ghosts. If anyone tells you different, ask them to drive the same 10 hours 5 nights in a row and then attend a parent-teacher conference and then stand in a DMV line and then start the loop again. Your mind doesn't snap. It just starts to agree with the dark in a cordial way. I started talking to him, the other me, even when he wasn't there. Don't do that, I'd say, feeling foolish. Stay off the line. I began to drive with my right hand in my lap to show him I wasn't going to overreact again. I practiced breathing for the curve, in through the nose, hold out. I taped a little sticky note under the speedometer that said, "Eyes to where you want to go." It's a trick from a track book I once read in a waiting room. Your hands follow your eyes. If you watch the drop, you'll go there. If you look at the line, you'll hold it. I tried to aim only for the line. There's a dash cam in company vans. It points forward and records when you brake hard or swear too loud because some algorithm thinks that means you're a danger to the logo. Luz had once shown me a clip of a driver singing and missing a deer by inches because he was clapping on the offbeat. The camera doesn't record the whole shift, just highlights like a mean-spirited blooper reel. After the third night of the other me, I asked Luz if I could review mine. I told her I'd had a few hard breaks and wanted to see if I was developing a pattern. "Your pattern is you try too hard," she said. But she slid the tablet over. I signed with my finger. We watched together at a folding table that was scarred with rings from 100 coffee cups. I kept thinking how dumb it would be if my double showed on that screen and Luz saw me watch myself. It would make it too real in a way that would force a conversation I wasn't ready to have. We scrubbed to the time code and watched the clip. The road appeared in the flat, cheerful color the camera prefers, as if asphalt isn't dangerous if it looks like a cartoon. Wipers squeaked. My van dipped and the frame leaned. My hands flashed at the bottom of the screen like pale, unsure birds. Headlights painted the guardrail posts. And there was nothing. No man, just the rain-slick curve and the gravel shoulder. Luz glanced at me without moving her head, an old dispatcher habit like a snake. I told myself the camera was lying because it wanted to save me from trouble. "Try not to brake hard on wet," she said. "It pings my board and keeps me awake." "It wasn't wet last night," I said, which wasn't the point. "I'm good, Luz." I slid the tablet back. "I'm good. That afternoon I cut my caffeine early and tried to nap before the route. But my upstairs neighbor ran a blender for 20 straight minutes and then apologized through the floor with a stomp that meant she wasn't sorry. I brewed coffee and added a little cinnamon the way a podcast had suggested to trick your brain into thinking the flavor is new. I left a note on my table for myself that said, "Remember Evan. When I'm smart, I make my future self a better version of me. When I'm dumb, I take my future self and drop him in a ditch." This time he was at the fourth switchback, my double. He stood closer to the white line than any man who wishes to live. There was no rain, no fog, no plausible deniability. His van was there and not there, edges wrong, like it had been shot through a glass of water. He raised his arm and I recognized the motion fully. It was my motion when I stand at a dock and wave the boat in. He was signaling me toward him. Not away from the drop, toward him. "Do you want me to hit you?" I said out loud like a lunatic. Is that the trade? Is that what stops it? This is the part I don't like to put into words because words make it solid. As I passed, something put weight on my passenger seat. Not the depression of a body, the weight of presence without pressure. The van shifted a quarter-inch left as if the load was different. The engine tone didn't change, but the space changed. The air cooled. The little hair on my chin lifted as if a breeze came up, except nothing moved. I looked over without wanting to and saw exactly nothing. But the dash cam would later show a shadow leaning into my window as if the darkness had elbows. It moved forward and back in a tiny bob that matched the dip and rise of the switchback, and at the loudest point in the noise, the audio caught a shape of a sentence. I didn't hear it then. I heard it later on the couch, Luz's tablet on my lap, the office empty, a timestamp that should have been meaningless. "What will you trade to stop?" the voice asked. Not my voice. Not Luz's, not my ex's, it was nobody's. It was the voice of the idea itself. The mountain asking a man how much his ledger could hold. I paused the clip and stared at the tablet so long my eyes watered. Then I touched the screen again and made the sound say it a second time. I'm not proud of what I did next. I put my thumbs into my eyes until the black stars erupted and the pain took the place of thought. I knew the rules of the road. If you tell your boss you're seeing people on curves and hearing the mountain ask questions, you stop being a night driver. You start being a liability. Luz hadn't watched that part with me. She was in the office making a pot of coffee that burned before it brewed. I locked the tablet and left it on her desk and told her I had to hit the bathroom, and then I went home without saying goodbye so the words wouldn't climb into my throat and force their way out. I called Mara because in moments when the world overfills, you either call the person you most trust or the person you most hurt. In my case, it's the same person now. She answered on the third ring with a guarded yeah. Hey, I said. How's Evan? He's asleep, she said. Late practice, I'm glad he likes it, I said. Listen, this is going to sound stupid. Did you call my dispatcher last week for any reason? What? She said sharp. No, why? Someone called her about a driver not making a stop. She said the caller gave your name. I thought maybe you were asking about something for Evan's school. I would not call your work about your work, she said. I learned that lesson. I know, I said. Sorry, I asked. It's just... Never mind. What's wrong? She said, softer. You sound weird. I just need to catch up on sleep, I said, which we both knew was code for I don't want to talk about it. If you need me to take your Saturday, I can, she said. But he'll be disappointed. He got a thing in his head about picking the belt with the loop for a hammer. He keeps telling me hammers need a place to sleep. I'll be there, I said. I promise. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen staring at the spot on the counter where there's a burn mark shaped like a rabbit. I put my finger on its ear. I wish I could say that's when I made a smart, rational choice like calling a therapist or a priest or the state troopers. What I did instead was worse and better. I decided not to drive the route the next night. I texted Luce and said the van's brakes felt off and I needed to take it to my mechanic in the morning. Take it, she replied instantly. I'd rather you miss a night than miss a curve. I set the alarm for a normal time and lay down in my bed like it was a museum display of a bed, a conceptual piece titled Man Attempts Ordinary Rest. When the alarm rang, I felt like a sane person for a minute. I ate eggs at a diner instead of from a gas station microwave. The waitress called me Han in a way that wasn't the stereotypical Han. It was the kind that lands like a hand to the shoulder. I took the van to Theo, my mechanic, who is built like the idea of a tree and never overcharges me because he likes hearing about the mountains. He checked the brakes, changed the oil, topped the washer fluid, told me my defroster would never be perfect because that's not a part. That's a personality, and sent me on my way with a receipt that smelled like grease. I avoided the road. I drove to the river and sat and watched water do what water does, which is mind its own path until the bank changes. I listened to my own breaths counted off against the slap of current on rock. When my phone vibrated, I jumped and caught it like it might bite. It was a forwarded email from dispatch. It came with a subject line so polite it felt like the digital world trying to put a hand on my arm. Customer complaint. I read the body on the riverbank with my back to the breeze. It said a delivery had been missed to a cabin called Pine Steps. It said the customer was expecting a package by midnight, and the driver had not arrived.
It said the customer had called twice.
It gave the name and the number. The name was Mara. The number was not Mara's number. The note said, please advise driver on urgency. Item is time sensitive. I called Luce and said, is this a joke? She sighed. What do you think I do all day, Kane? The complaint, I said. This person. It's my ex's name. Lots of Maras in the world, she said. Not the name I'd pick, but it's not like she's a unicorn. The cabin, I said. Pine Steps is on my route. It is, she said. You want me to give it to someone else tonight? I thought about how you can avoid a thing until it walks into the room with a name tag on that says your life. No, I said. Give me the route. I'll take it. When you make a deal with yourself, you have to write the terms down clearly or the human part of you will adjust them mid-game. I would drive the route. If I saw my double again, I would not brake for him. I would not swerve away. I would not get tricked into aiming for the drop because I was trying to save a version of me who didn't need saving. If he wanted to stand that close to the line, he could bear the consequences. That was the deal I wrote in my head and stamped with my tongue by saying it out loud 3 times in the van before the first incline. I don't want to pretend heroes make plans and then stick to them. The road changes you. The weather changes the road. I climbed, and with every turn of the fan and every whine of the belt and every mile of centerline striping my eyes, felt like they were being scratched from the inside. I took the coffee sips at controlled intervals so I wouldn't spike and crash before the crest. I passed the runaway ramp and the clock glowed 1:49. I passed the ghost sign for the motel that burned, the white paint still faint on the cinder block like a grin. I passed the turnout where you can look across at nothing and swear something is looking back. He was at the 5th switchback this time, standing so close to the white line that his boots were half over it. He was smiling a little, not with his mouth, but somehow with the bones of his face, the way I do when Evan tells me he likes my driving because it looks like a video game. The wrong van behind him quivered faintly like heat on pavement. The arm came up. The arm came down. I did what I promised myself I'd do. I kept my eyes where I wanted to go. I kept my hands light. I did not brake. I did not swerve. He shifted at the last second. He cheated my rule, if you can call a ghost a cheater. He stepped a half pace into the lane so that my plan forced a collision. I understood in a long blue instant that my cleverness had not impressed the ledger. The choice was the same as always. Protect the man in the road or protect the man in the van. I had a third choice too, new and old at once. I could take the shoulder and the short drop where a guardrail had never been installed because the budget ran out 30 years ago. I could let the van fall the way a coin falls. I could pay up. What will you trade to stop? The voice asked again, not in the air this time, but in my chest where the heavy breath gathers. I thought of Evan talking about hammers sleeping in loops. I thought of Mara's careful courtesy when she says goodnight on the porch. I thought of Luce's braid and her thermos and how she deserves drivers who don't force her to write letters to widows. I thought of my own face 40 feet ahead in the high beams, older than it should be, hungry in a way hunger can't fix. There are stupid, glorious seconds where you can actually alter the arc of a life. It's not that movies are wrong. It's that they rush you past the waiting to get to the choosing. I had been waiting for weeks without saying it. Maybe longer. I moved the wheel a whisper toward the edge. Not a turn, a breath. It was enough to bring the shoulder into consideration. The van seemed to exhale in relief. The nose tipped to it like a dog to a dish. Something else happened too. The other me stepped fully into the lane and laid his palm on my hood, and I felt that touch through steel like a heartbeat you can feel in your teeth at a concert. The van bucked and the handprint was there for a second, pale on the wet metal as if heat could leave a ghost the way cold does. He leaned over the passenger window again, shadowing glass with shadow, and said, not with a mouth but with the full press of attention, "You can reset it or pay it. Your choice, Kane." That's when the radio woke up. You've never heard a mountain eat FM until you've heard it spit it back in a language you recognize. The song that had been fading came clear for 2 lines right at the chorus. And it was a song Evan makes me play because he likes the part where the drummer misses a beat on purpose. The singer shouted something like, "Don't give it up," and then the signal shredded again. It hit me dumb and true, the way signs hit you when you're already looking for them. It felt like being a kid and seeing your dad at the fence at your game even when he told you he couldn't make it. It felt like being forgiven for something small and then deciding to fix something big. I didn't aim for the drop. I didn't aim for him either. I aimed for the center of the lane and held the line like my note told me. In the exact middle of that choice, the van did something I can't explain with physics and don't want to explain with faith. It lifted the front weight 3 inches. It slipped like a puck on ice and then regripped a foot to the left as if the asphalt had moved under me. The impact I braced for didn't come. The shoulder I half chose didn't take me. My nose pointed again toward the rise. My hands found where to be without me telling them. The other me glanced off the edge of the hood with a light tap like rain. I breathed and decided not to die, all in one breath. I made it through the curve. My van floated another 4 feet out, then brought itself back. I didn't look in the mirror. The radio found an ad for a tire shop and yelled a phone number at me that I tried to memorize because the human brain is an idiot and needs homework. I made it to the next turnout and pulled in, and I put my head on the wheel for a very long time. When my breathing slowed and the shaking turned the corner from crisis to cleanup, I realized I had the Pine Steps delivery still on board. The clock said I could make it if I didn't talk myself out of believing in asphalt. The road after an almost death is not normal. but it pretends. I drove without the taste of copper in my mouth. I drove like I had hands that believed in forearms. Pine Steps is on a spur road that curls back on itself 3 times like a possum tail, and then it buckles up into trees so close their branches scrape the van in winter. The cabin is up 2 flights of wooden steps that are slick with pine needles and a green that is not moss and not paint, but a combination of the two. The porch light was on. It always is. That's part of the deal with those cabins. They belong to owners who don't live in them, and owners think light equals safety. I carried the box up because I needed to finish something. Between flights I stopped because I am not a young man and stairs make you honest. The night had the damp that settles when fog can't decide if it wants to be. The light at the top did a little halo thing that would look cheesy in a photograph and looked perfect to me, because it meant a person had been here and thought about where the screws go. I reached the porch and saw a shape in the chair facing the dark, someone with a blanket over their legs. I shifted the box to my hip and said, "Delivery," because the woods don't need more hello than that. The blanket moved and a woman sat up. She had long hair and a messy gathered knot at the back that looked like workday Mara's. My tongue went heavy. She wasn't Mara. She had Mara's posture only in the way that women who have carried babies sit when their hips ache. She squinted at me through the light and said, "You made it." "You called dispatch," I said. "The name." She shook her head. "I didn't call anyone," she said. "But I'm glad you came. It's for him." She nodded at the door. "He needs it." I looked where she indicated and saw nothing but the cabin door and the little shoe rack people always put on mountain porches when they're from the city. The box was light, and too light sometimes means expensive or cruel. I wasn't going to ask what was in it. We sign nothing up here. That's the trust's price. I put the box down and stepped back because the porch felt like a stage. And she stood with the blanket clutched around her like a robe and no shoes, which made me mad at her for a second because the boards are splintered. She opened the door and the air that came out smelled like cedar and lemon cleaner, and something old and familiar, like the inside of a carpentry shop. She didn't invite me in. I didn't ask. She picked up the box and for an instant she looked confused, head tilted the way my double had tilted his head on the line. Then she nodded to herself, said thanks without the X, just a plain thanks that sits correctly in the mouth, and closed the door. The porch light hummed. The woods had that feeling like everything is holding its breath before the night animals start their debate. On the way down the steps, I pictured the ledger again. Maybe I had paid something already by not choosing one kind of cowardice over another. Maybe that wasn't how it worked. My brain wanted a receipt and there wasn't one. The next nights he came earlier. That's the part I didn't anticipate. I figured I'd passed the test or dodged it or reset it. It isn't that kind of story. He met me on the second curve like he was in a hurry. Then the first, then on a straightaway where there was no reason for a man to stand and wave a van in, unless he wanted the van to take the line that wasn't there. He stood closer each time. He raised his arm and dropped it like a metronome that likes the moment before the beat. He leaned at the window sometimes, and I heard the voice ask its question with variants I pretend are different but aren't. What will you trade for 1 year? What will you trade to keep the wheel? What will you trade to see your kid buy a belt for a hammer to sleep in? I tried the rational defenses. I swapped routes with a day driver for 1 shift. On the highway at noon among minivans and motorcycles, he appeared in the glare, standing in the median with heat rippling him into 2. He didn't wave that time. He watched me watch him, and I almost hit a rental with plates from a state where mountains are something you buy art of. I stopped listening to the radio. Then I turned it up every time he came to drown the question. I drank too much coffee to keep the voice out, and then too little because my hands trembled. I tried talking to him at home like he might be around. I tried not talking to him at all so I could pretend it wasn't happening. What you don't say isn't real is a lie tired men tell themselves to get to the next task. I finally told Luz a version of it because she asked if I needed time off, and enough of the truth came out in my tone that she put her hand over mine, which she never does. "Go home," she said. "Sleep. I'll give the run to Dane for 2 nights. "Dane's too aggressive on the downhills," I said, automatic. "He won't last." "It's not your job to protect him from the road," she said, which is something more like a prayer than advice. That night at home, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., and I picked it up because tired men never stop hoping the call is the right call, even when it never is. It was a notification from the Dashcam app because the company loves an alert. It said hard brake event detected. It gave a time and a location. It gave a clip I could play. I watched it in my dark kitchen with the rabbit-shaped burn mark reflecting the screen light on the counter. I watched Dane's hands at the wheel, smooth, too smooth, and the road ahead that I recognized even without signs. The bright leaned. The frame dipped. A shape stepped into the headlights, lifted an arm, and Dane did not brake. The van passed through the figure as if through mist, except the mist had resistance. The number at the bottom that tracks speed flickered. The audio captured the sound of air changing its mind. The figure was me. Not because it had my face. The clip didn't have that resolution. It was me because I felt it. The way you feel your phone vibrate when it doesn't, ghost tingle in a pocket. It was me because I had been standing there so long that the road knew my weight. Me, turned his head in the clip like he was looking back at the person in the passenger seat, and I heard a voice that I refused to say was mine, ask Dane a question I didn't think he could hear. The app doesn't pick up everything, but it caught a fragment. All I needed. What will you— I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch until the light came in like water under a door, and the world woke up for people who don't deal with ledgers and curves. I went to the hardware store with Evan, and he picked a belt that had loops for fathers and mothers and the ghost of a hammer no longer made. He put it on over his hoodie and laughed at how it slid down over his hips. I tightened it for him. He asked if he could keep it on in the car. Mara looked at me like this is the small good we share, and I nodded. We ate sandwiches in the van. Evan traced the route on the map again, finger on the line like he could press it straight. "Do you ever get scared up there?" he asked with his mouth full. "Sometimes," I said, "but I know the road, and I keep my eyes where I want to go." He nodded solemnly like I had given him true math. "Coach says that for bikes too." "He's right," I said. That night I told myself I'd quit. I told myself I'd send a text that said this ends and I'd mean it. Instead, I did the thing men in stories like this always do. I went up the mountain one more time to see if the rule would change at the last second and declare me exempt. The weather was dry. The radio was off. The fan clicked twice every time it looped. I wore a second jacket because the cold settles in the liver. I reached the place where the guardrail never got installed. The not budget-making and negative in the world you could drive into. And I saw him ahead, not by the line but up on the shoulder, waiting in front of the thinner trees where the scrub cannot decide if it wants to be bush or grass. He wasn't waving. He was standing like a man waiting for a late bus, tired of bringing his arm up and down for someone who always finds a way to pretend he didn't see. I slowed without thinking, then accelerated because I don't take instruction well. He lifted his chin like, "Fine, let's do it this way." When I was a car length away, he stepped into the lane. He had my face. I couldn't tell you what the expression said, because I was too busy learning that you can love and hate a person in the same second when that person is your own version of a debt collector. The passenger side cooled. The van edged left as if trying to decide on my behalf. The voice came again and the road tilted in. "What will you trade to stop?" I thought of everything I could trade that wasn't me. The van, the job, the days I waste. The nights I try to fill with noise because silence reminds me of every promise I didn't keep. The answer the road wanted wasn't any of those. The ledger is simple. It wants a mile. It wants an hour. It wants a turn taken at a cost. I understood it this time like a song you finally hear the lyrics to after 100 plays. You don't repay something like this by driving away from it. You repay it by driving into it, and not off the edge but through the center. I don't know if you've ever held a wheel so lightly you can feel the road thinking back at you. I don't know if you've ever said a prayer without words to a mountain you don't believe in. I let the van float an inch right, and then guided it back left like a shoulder check in traffic exactly when the other me stepped into what would have been my path if I were a lazier version of me. The two moments overlapped like your hand on a page when you turn it. The air in the cab pressed hard against my chest, and for a second I felt two hearts beating. A second heart not in me but near me. The hood whispered against fabric that wasn't fabric. The tires kissed gravel and found grip again. The van straightened. The shoulder went on being a shoulder. The guardrail gap looked past me at the night and shrugged. In the mirror, there was only road. In my lungs, there was only breath. The world had not reset. It had not stopped either. It had simply acknowledged that the mile it wanted could be paid a breath at a time instead of all at once. You want an ending where I prove something I know. I want one too. I would like to tell you I took 2 weeks off, found a day shift delivering bread, and the double never came again. I would like to tell you I took a picture of the handprint on the hood, and it looked like a map of where not to go. I would like to tell you I don't hear the voice behind me when I climb the stairs to my place, because the hall light burned out and the super forgot to replace it. I can tell you this. The next night I drove the route and he wasn't on the 5th switchback or the 4th or the 3rd. He wasn't at the 1st either. The road felt like itself in the way a person can feel like themselves after crying at a sink. I smiled for 5 miles and then got mad at myself for assuming I'd won. 2 nights later I saw him on the long descending stretch before Mid-Pine, where the rock face feeds water into the ditch and frogs sing in spring. He was sitting on the guardrail post with his hands on his knees like a man who finished a job and isn't ready to go home. He didn't wave. I didn't slow. He tilted his head and I felt a press of attention from the passenger seat that felt like a question and a goodbye at once. The radio, which I had left off, crackled by itself and played a second of a baseball game. The announcer said, "Swings," and then the sound vanished. That syllable felt like an instruction. I was doing fine with the compromise until an hour ago. That's why I'm writing now. I got back down, unloaded, turned in my clipboard, nodded at Luz, made a joke about how her coffee could strip paint, and drove home in the pink that makes the mountains look like old bruises. I fell onto the couch and woke up to a knock I had to convince myself wasn't my heart. It was a cop with a polite face who asked my name and asked if I owned the van currently parked under a maple, with leaves that will be beautiful in a week. "We got a call," he said, "from a driver. He said a man was in the road, and then he didn't see him anymore, and then he swore he saw him in the passenger seat. He described you." He took out a notebook. "He used your name. You weren't on the route tonight, were you?" "I wasn't. I had traded a shift with Dane so I could take Evan to a school thing earlier, a demonstration of small machines built from kits. Evan's gear system never quite meshed and he didn't care, because he had a belt for a hammer to sleep in. I wasn't on the route and the cop was standing in my doorway with the air of a man who would like this interaction to have a box to check and no supplementary notes. "I'm off tonight," I said. "The driver said the man in the road looked like you," he said gently, and then like he was in the cab with him. "You know how people get at night. We figured we'd check." I took a breath that did not help. "I don't know what to tell you, officer," I said. "Some roads keep their stories. People see things. I'll be on tomorrow." He looked at me a long time in a way that suggested he had his own ledger running, one with names I didn't know. "You take care up there," he said finally. "My brother pulled 2 out in January and he hasn't slept right since." "I take care," I said. It came out like a promise I don't fully control. He tipped his hat in a way that would read as corny in writing but looked right in the hall light and walked away. I closed the door, leaned my head against it and let the wood be cool on my forehead. I texted Luz and said I'd take the route tomorrow. She replied with a thumbs up and a lightning bolt, which is her version of a joke. I sat down on the couch. I opened the dashcam app because I am an idiot. There was a clip flagged from Dane's route, time-stamped 2:17, which is either coincidence or the one place the mountain puts the bookmark. I tapped it. The van moved in the way I know so well it feels like a limb. The road leaned. The lights found the white line. A man stood by the edge and looked like me and then looked like no one. The audio warbled and then found clarity for exactly one question. Not from inside the cab, but from around it, as if the valley were asking itself. It said, "What will you trade to stop?" Then it said something else, not a second phrase, but an after sound, like the echo the mountains make when the train horn tells the gorge its schedule. It wasn't English. It was a word I don't know for a balance that doesn't finish, a counting that never closes. "I'm going to take the route tomorrow. You can call that bravery if you want. I call it the way my life is arranged. I've thought about not telling this story because stories like this are like water. They find the lowest place and they settle there, and then the next person who doesn't sleep enough drinks from them. If you're that person, I'm sorry. Keep your eyes where you want to go. Keep your hands light. Don't assume the choices are the ones you think. Roads like this take a mile whether you offer it or not. You can make it a mile stretched across nights with a price in breath, or you can give it all at once. There are people who will tell you the mountain doesn't care either way. I think it does. I think it cares about the exact turn you take and the exact breath you give up for it. If you're ever on that stretch and you see a man at the line, waving you in with the exact tilt of your head and the exact jacket you're wearing, don't look at his face. Look at the road. If you hear something lean at your passenger window and ask you what you'll trade, don't answer it with a word. Answer with your hands, and if you see a van parked at the turnout with the hood warm and a print on it like a hand made from light, that's mine. Don't try to wipe it off. It doesn't come off anyway. It fades by itself and then returns when you least want it to. I'm sitting here now with the keys on the table, and the map folded to the page where the switchbacks look like someone drew a spine wrong. The house is quiet. My upstairs neighbor's blender finally resting. My phone face down because I can't stand the thought of 217 blinking at me like an appointment I forgot to cancel. I'll sleep if I can. I'll wake if I can't. I'll go up. I'll go back down. If the road wants more, it can ask again. I know the question now. I also know my answer, and it isn't dramatic. It's just the weight of my hands on the wheel, steady. Not too much, not too little, each night a small coin laid on a ledger that I hope never fills. And if the man at the line steps closer than he should, if he raises his arm, if he drops it in that satisfied way like he's counting down to a moment I can't see yet, I'll hold the lane and try not to look for myself in the glass. Because the worst part is not that he looks like me. It's that sometimes out of the corner of my eye I think he looks like someone else too. My son in 20 years, hand up, head tilted, asking me to pay for a mistake I haven't made yet. And there's a turn up there where the guardrail ends. And the mountain counts how many of us keep the line, and how many of us don't, and I can hear it every time I pass. Not a whisper, not a voice, just the sound of a breath taken and held, waiting to see which way I choose. I didn't think I'd ever write this down, but the sound that keeps following me home from Laurel Fork makes sleep feel like a shift I can't clock out of, and I need to put it somewhere outside my ribs. If you've ever worked long enough that your body keeps doing the job in the dark, fingers closing around a wrench that isn't there, shoulders bracing for a weight nobody's lifting, maybe you'll understand why I tried to tell myself none of this was supernatural. It was just old routine bleeding into the night. That's what I said when I pulled up to my dad's single wide last month, cut the engine and heard his cough carry over the creek from the direction of the tipple. 2 short barks and a scrape, the exact rhythm he used to make at the halfway point of a shift like a man tapping his own metronome. He's been dead a year. The tipple's been shuttered longer. But the cough came light and definite through crickets and water, the way a chain sounds when it drags across rock and then lifts. I'd come back to settle what was left of his life and sell his truck. The county had sent a certified letter, back taxes, final notice, the kind of paper that uses your full name like a parent who's already taken the car keys. If I didn't pay, they'd tape his lot number to a list and auction the trailer with the lawnmowers and boats people give up when they get tired of losing. I told myself it would be a week. I told my roommate Kayla I'd be back by Friday because there wasn't much to keep. Dad had lived like a man saving everything for later, coffee cans of bolts that fit nothing, receipts worn soft, a 3-legged bar stool he fixed with a stack of Reader's Digests. He'd worked 30-plus years between 2 tips, most of them at Black Elk. And if you don't know what a tipple is, picture a barn crossed with a rib cage and a railroad bridge. Belts run through its guts like roads, chutes and rollers and catwalks. The big rattling throat where rock gets sorted and dumped into hoppers. Ours squats over Laurel Fork Creek, all flaking paint and broken panes. The last thing you see leaving town and the first thing that meets you coming home. I stood on the porch with one box on my hip and waited for some neighbor's TV to explain the cough. The only lights were porch bulbs and blue fizz from a bug zapper up the hill. Inside smelled like cigarettes boxed in cardboard. His boots lined up under the window like they'd stand if asked. On the fridge, under a bluebird magnet, he'd taped a scrap of paper in block letters too careful for groceries. Mason 6, Haley 4, Colt 3. No last names. No dollar signs. I figured they were hours he owed someone for hauling junk. I didn't know a Mason, a Haley, or a Colt. I took a shower that smelled like pennies, told myself the cough was a night bird, and fell asleep to the hum of a refrigerator that had survived 3 floods and most of my childhood. Next morning, I drove to the Triple Sun on 119 because their coffee doesn't taste like a shovel. The pig-shaped hot dog roller squeaked slow as always. Gary, who's been behind that register since we were printing fake IDs with word art, looked up from a paper the size of a doormat and asked if I was back for good. Then he remembered, and the word good went soft. He asked if I'd heard the tipple. What do you mean heard? Kids cut that fence again, he said, snapping the lid onto my cup like he was afraid for the drink. Dare each other to climb the sorter. Mason Penland tried to spend the night. Sheriff hauled them out. Boy swears he heard the belts moving. No juice, but you know how it is. How is it? Wind's wrong this week. He lowered his voice, which in Laurel Fork is the opposite of subtle. Don't go in there. Sorter floor's pudding now. Looks like ground. Isn't. You step, it drinks you. I spent the day in rubber gloves with a tape gun. Cleaning always starts ugly. Brittle blinds, a Santa mug with a chipped nose. Until a small thing knocks the wind out of you. For me, it was a pencil with teeth marks and a coal smudge that never washed out. He'd kept it in a mason jar labeled going to-do list. I sat on the sink edge and cried like a person in a hard chair at a long service. Late afternoon, I heard voices outside, kids. I looked through the screen. 3 of them stood where the lot road meets the creek. The particular posture of middle schoolers pretending they haven't made up their minds. The shortest had a Yankees cap with a split brim and a gap where a tooth would be. Mason. The tall boy with careful shoulders was Colt. The girl was Haley, denim jacket, braid like a rope. They stared through the cut fence at the tipple the way you look at water you're trying to convince yourself you're fine to jump. You 3 know Sheriff Mays will tan your backsides if he catches you over there. I called, aiming for neighborly, not cranky. The creek ran low and smelled metallic. Mason grinned like trouble didn't know its own name. You hear it last night? I heard you moving around thinking about being dumb, I said. I also heard my own business, which is cleaning. You're free to help. He liked that. My dad says they ran the belt slow after midnight so they wouldn't wake folks, he said. Says it sounded like breathing. Your dad is allergic to magic, I said. Names? I knew Mason, but I asked to make it formal. The tall boy said Colt. The girl said Haley, eyes sliding toward the fence. You need to stay on this side of the creek, I told them. There are floors in there that aren't floors. You fall through, you don't hit bottom. You get rolled until somebody says your name and nobody will. We weren't going in, Haley said too fast. We were just going to see if it's true. What's true? That if you ask for your time back, Mason said like a kid telling a camp rumor. It gives it to you. At the time clock. You press it once for every hour they stole. Then you ask for your time. It makes the belts roll so you know it's coming. He said it like a recipe his cousin swore works on a stubborn pie. I laughed for show, but the fridge list thumped in my chest. Time doesn't come back, I said. It sets like concrete. Go home. They nodded like kids nod when a grown-up needs to feel in charge and stayed until dusk. The mosquitoes went almonds. The tipple turned to a black triangle against violet. I heard the cough again. Low, familiar, somewhere high in that ribcage, and saw a cone of LED light bob, stiff as a metronome. The kids had ignored me. I grabbed Dad's mag light and my headlamp and sloshed across on pallets the creek had gifted us for a bridge. Coal dust lives in the mouth of that place. You taste it like grit on the backs of your teeth. Belts hung slack on rollers, long black tongues. Warning signs, pinch point, no riders, glowed dull in my lamp. The stairs were slotted steel. Safety yellow turned old lemon. I saw their jitter of light up on the 5th flight and swore into my sleeve. Don't make me call your parents, I said, breath bouncing off metal into my face. The floor up there's gone to soup. We're just looking, Mason said. 2 minutes. 2 minutes is enough to stop being careful, I said. Down. They kept climbing toward the sorter, a big box with chutes and a little office off to one side where the time clock and a metal chair and the percolator lived. At the landing, I saw what Gary meant. The floor in front of that door sagged like a wet blanket over something that wanted air. That's the lie Slurry tells. It looks like ground. It isn't. It's black milk with a skin. Don't even breathe on that, I said, catching Mason's shoulder. He didn't shrug me off. We stood with our lights trembling and listened. That's when the cough came from the little office. The exact double bark and scrape my father made when he came in from the truck with his thermos. Dad? I said before my brain caught my mouth. The door creaked open on a room frozen in place. Swollen logbook. A safety poster with a smiling man in a hard hat. Percolator rainbowed with oil. Wall clock stuck at 11:12, and the time clock with its slot fat as a mouth. Over it hung a green safety slogan, Save Eyes, Wear Eye Protection, and rain had pulled the paint into threads that read new words if you stared long enough. Save us, wear out, and if I blinked, back pay due. The D and do bent until it looked like you. This is the one from the video, Haley whispered. What video? Snap, Colt said. Got taken down. They said if you clock the hours they skimmed, the belts start and it gives your time back. He sounded embarrassed. Don't touch it, I said. We're leaving. Lights off. Hand on the rail. Exactly where I step, we back down. At the second landing, Haley tilted her head. I felt it too. A near sound like a belt passing a roller slow as a second hand. Not a squeal. A whisper. The catwalk hummed under our feet. No power, I said, like saying it could turn physics off. It's the creek. Has to be, we got out. The kids ducked the fence and ran the lot road like honest cowards. Don't tell my dad, Mason yelled. He'll take my phone. Then don't make me, I said, and watched until their shapes were swallowed by sumac and porch light. Inside the fence, dust floated wrong, like snow learning to fall sideways. I locked the trailer twice. I slept in my boots until 2 and then dreamed of a lever clicking when no hand touched it. In the morning, a bruise lived on the inside of my wrist. A perfect circle like a cold coin had been pressed there. The skin around it felt warm, not pain, pressure. I tied a bandana over it and got back to boxing his life. People drifted in and out the way they do here. Mrs. Collins brought misshapen cookies. A white truck tried to buy the F-150 for scrap. Sheriff Mays rolled slow and decided he didn't want to get out and talk about fences. Around noon, the kids came back with fishing poles they weren't using. We waved like nothing had happened. On the phone, Kayla asked if our kitchen clock still ran 10 minutes slow. I told her I'd fix it when I got back. Before I could hang up, the cough came through the window. Loud enough she heard it, and I cut the call because lying into an echo hurts. At the fence, fresh footprints marked the dust like photographs. The kids had gone back. Worse, round wet stamps, coin-sized circles, spotted the steel steps at even intervals like punch marks. 1 at the base, 2 at the first landing. A counting of something that wanted counting. Mason, I yelled. Haley, Colt! The belts whispered more eager now, like breath deepening in sleep. I didn't think. I climbed. This is the part I know was stupid, and I tell it anyway. They were in the sorter. Haley stood with her palms on the time clock like steadying a skittish colt. Colt hovered with his weight in his heels. Mason had one hand on the green sign, mouthing the paint drips like they spelled for him alone. The floor sagged like a tired stomach. A dark bubble rose in the slurry and sighed flat. What are you doing? I asked, not angry, begging. Just the hours, Mason said, eyes huge. We pressed once and heard it. We didn't press twice. He looked at me like I was the person who could stop time. We're leaving, I said, all bone. Exactly where I step? We edged along the narrow rib of real steel between door and sag. I got Haley to me, then Colt. Mason lingered with his finger pointed at the clock like it had asked for him. It needs one more, he said soft. For the man. And before I could say no, he tapped the face. The clock clicked. A tidy little bureaucratic sound. The belts breathed like a sleeper flipping a pillow. The slurry opened a round lip. A pale scrap surfaced, nothing you could name, something you didn't want to try, and slid away obedient as paper. We had 1 beat to get out before that inch of shift invited us. Come now, I said, and we moved. Haley clung and mirrored my feet. Colt leaned toward the door and didn't look down once. Mason made the fatal middle schooler move. He heard a cough from the catwalk to the right, my father's, plain as attack, and turned his head. His heel slid. The beam knocked a rung that wasn't a beam anymore. My bandana slipped. The bruise flashed in the doorway light like a stamp with faint numbers around it. The clock clicked again on its own like a clerk who knows your name. Somewhere to our right, a chain that wasn't there made the sound of being looped over a bar. We got out anyway. Fear is good when you need it. We went down the stairs, not running, not stopping. Shoulders tight, breath thin, feet careful as if carrying bowls of water. We ducked the fence and stood in the creek long enough to feel the life of it pushing our shins. Back on my porch, I poured sweet tea into anything with a lip and called Mason's father. He came in 3 minutes, read what he needed in his boy, thanked me, and steered him by the ear. More guide than punishment. Haley's mother arrived with a dish towel on her shoulder and fed her 2 fried bologna sandwiches at my kitchen counter without asking. Colt stood on the edge of the porch looking at his hands like they'd come with responsibility he hadn't asked for. When the trailer went quiet again, I pulled the bandana. The bruise had darkened, a ring with faint numbers like a clock rubbed into my skin with a pencil. If I pressed the center, it pushed back, not pain. A nudge, as if the clock lived under there and wanted me to keep count. The union hall was open, gray blinds and the smell of paper and coffee. Joe, small-shouldered and spool-waisted, remembered my father before I said my name. I told him about the cough and the clock. He didn't laugh. He tapped the blotter with a thick finger like a metronome. "You're the third this year," he said. Quiet a while before that. "You ever work something long enough your hands keep doing it in sleep?" Same thing, but a building. Last week before the shutdown, they shaved hours. Some man in a university shirt said shift boundary and quarterlies. Cards went light. Mrs. Lowry came up here with eyes like winter. Her man Trent fell on sorter. 3 hours missing. We wrote letters. They sent something, not all. A place'll gnaw on that kind of short till it finds a bone. Folks go up, press the clock what they think's owed. Sometimes it breathes different after. How do I stop it? "You don't," he said, polite as a doctor. "You finish what it started." He pulled a folded fire plan, thumb yellowed, from a drawer. Someone had circled the sorter and marked an X on the catwalk over the main belt. Clocked Trent Lowry out. 7 if you count the half hours they skimmed. Maybe 5. If you stop short, it starts over. If you go long, it keeps your time instead. Don't put your fingers where the belt wants. Power's off. Habit ain't. "I'm not playing with a clock," I said. He nodded like a man who knows you will. I went at dusk. Dusk is worse than night. Shadows are honest in the dark. They lie when the sky still remembers blue. The creek muttered over pallets. The belts whispered faint as breath. The sorter office door stood open like a mouth. The green paint drips read, "Back pay due again, and if I squinted, back pay you." I put my wrist to the wall. The bruise warmed like a coin in a palm. I remembered Dad at the sink telling me about Trent, the supervisor. The half hour skimmed, the meeting full of safety culture, the way he said he stayed late to straighten cards so they'd pay the widow right, voice doing that gentle lying he used when his hands couldn't fix it. I pressed the lever once. The click was neat and satisfying in a way that angered me. I pressed twice. The belts exhaled. A third time. From the catwalk to the right came a cough, not a ghost sound, a man's cough whose coffee had gone cold. "Trent?" I said because I didn't want to say Dad. A fourth, a fifth. The paint threads trembled like sap touched by wind. A sixth. The room leaned, not the steel, the feeling that time itself tipped an inch. I pressed the seventh because stopping on 6 made my bones itch. The belts made a knot sigh, the little hum metal makes when you take the weight off. The cough came once more, not pleading, not glad. Every day, like a man clearing his throat in a doorway so the house knows he made it home. My lamp flickered as if something passed between me and light. The chain that had no business being there didn't swing. Silence felt like something gone. Back at the trailer, the creek sounded like itself. The bruise wasn't gone, but the numbers looked like watermarks. On the fridge, under the Bluebird magnet, a new scrap sat in my father's careful hand, Jobeth 7. Under it, theirs cleared. Mason 0, Haley 0, Colt 0. I hadn't put it there. I didn't move it. I slept on the couch and dreamed of men lining up with plastic cards, a machine making polite final noises. I wish I could stop here. A slow machine wants a debt settled. A daughter settles it, fade out. That's not what we were taught about time. Time's a habit. It's a job. It doesn't end because one shift does. It wants next. For a few days, the belts kept quiet. The cough stayed out of my screens. The bruise faded to old glue. I paid the taxes, boxed dishes, let a scrap man who actually showed by the truck. People nodded like Laurel Fork had done what it does. Not right, but complete. Then, the morning I meant to leave, I woke to a polite sound near the creek. Not the chain, a latch. Like a front door eased shut by someone not wanting to wake the house. Under the Bluebird magnet lay another note. Dad's square letters. Check taillight. Buy salt. Clock when you leave. No, please. Care as instruction. My wrist tingled the way a foot falls asleep. The present had gotten comfortable with the door. I couldn't tell if it was kindness or claim. I stayed longer than I said. Kayla texted pictures of the peace lily like it was blaming me. I told her the truck took time. Truth. The tipple's silence felt like a test I was scared to pass. If it stayed quiet, maybe something had worked. If I stayed, I could keep kids from counting wrong. School started. The fence gap widened fresh. Every afternoon, Mason with a stray cat he pretended he hadn't adopted, Haley pretending she wasn't scared while watching the sorter door, Colt standing like a man whose body already understood moving heavy things carefully. They didn't go in. I didn't either. We watched the rib cage over the creek like it might choose to breathe. On a rainy Wednesday, I heard the clock again. One clean click. Then another hours later, like a clerk stamping a card at a desk you can't see. Not urgent, regular. The sound bled into creak and fridge until I couldn't tell unless I stood in the doorway with my wrist pressed to the jamb. Whether it was the past doing its job or my own stubborn heart. You hear it? Mason asked one evening, scratching the cat while it pretended not to care. Yes. Think it's done? I think it knows when it's owed, I said. And he nodded with a miner's son understanding he shouldn't have. I told him to tell his dad to bring the mower because my lot looked like bad hair. He did loudly, brave against dusk. I packed boxes. I checked the taillight because the note told me to. Before bed, I stood on the porch. The creek talked to itself. Crickets sawed. The tipple held its breath. I felt silly and with the same breath counted. No, not watched, counted. That difference matters. Watched his eyes, counted his time. I turned off the light and slept to the idea of a clock in another room. At 5 a.m., the latch sounded again. I opened the door into gray morning and laundry powder air, that clean chemical of shirts on a winter line. No one stood there. When I shut the door, it made that new latch sound. Thoughtful, careful, like a habit practicing itself. Inside, under the magnet, a fresh note. Lock the door. Clock when you leave. The second line had a dent, like the pen had paused there, unsure. I put it in the drawer with the pencil and his jar of screws. I made coffee. The percolator hiccuped like a belly. I burned my mouth on purpose because it felt like something I chose. If you're waiting for the part where the slurry takes me or the belt grabs a sleeve, I'm sorry. That's not this. There's no gore, no cops at the lot road, no screaming. There's a polite machine calling names after it should have stopped, and a small circle under my skin that wakes if I press. There's a town that wears grief like dust and kids who test fences because that's what kids do near old machines. There's a daughter who thought labor ends when a whistle blows and learned it doesn't. There's a habit. There's a debt. There's a door that latches softly now when it never had a reason to. I did leave. The truck started on the second try. I strapped 3 boxes in and put the cat in the passenger footwell because apparently it had adopted me. I checked the taillight. I turned off the porch light because he would have. I stood on the step and listened for the cough and didn't hear it. I wanted to be grateful and I wanted to be warned and I couldn't pick. I locked the door. I pressed my thumb to the inside of my wrist. The circle pushed back, faint as a library stamp. Then it let go. I made the curve out of town past the skeleton over the creek. In the rear view, the tipple was angles again. Paint a dull wound that once said safety and now said nothing you could read unless you'd already learned the letters. At the red light by the triple sun, the pig roller doing its tired revolution, I heard the time clock one more time, one tidy click, faint as breath. Not a demand. A reminder. I could have driven on and never written this, but owed hours don't vanish when ignored. They go somewhere. They settle in, whoever's soft enough. So here it is. I went into the sorter and pressed the clock for a man who didn't get to clock out. The belts turned without power. The paint bled words it had no right to. A door shut with a chain that wasn't there until it was. 3 kids stood inches from a floor that would have taken them like milk. I cleared their names. The machine kept mine. It didn't take my blood or breath. It took the part of my day that used to be wholly mine when nobody was watching. If you pass Laurel Fork and hear a polite sound under the crickets, click, like a card stamped. Don't gawk. Don't climb. Don't test the rail with your weight. Respect a building that labored longer than it was paid for. If someone owes you hours, ask for them where there's still a face. If you owe hours, pay them. A place like ours keeps books better than we do. It remembers. The kids say the paint reads back pay due. I saw it read back pay you. Some days when the creek is low and the wind goes long down the valley, I still hear my father's cough in the ribs over the water. It doesn't ask. It doesn't accuse, it counts. It makes time regular in a place that should have been allowed to stop. And at the end of days when I close a door that latches softly now, I touch the fading circle under my skin and feel it press back, gentle as an old habit, just enough to say, I'm still here. That's as close as I'm likely to get to peace. Or warning, I can't tell which, and that's the part that follows me. The small click in the ribs when the house is quiet. The sound of a shift changing somewhere you can't see. The sound of hours coming due. I don't write posts. Not even to complain about landlords or campus parking, so this is already out of character. I'm putting it here because it keeps getting into my head where the quiet is supposed to be. If you've seen the photos of the place we went, those turquoise bowls in a Southwest Virginia gorge, they don't tell the whole truth. They show a summer color you can sip with your eyes. They don't show that the water there knows how to take a breath and make it sound like your name exhaled into a glass. We went on a weekday to avoid the weekend circus. Lacey had the day off from the library desk where she sits under air that could preserve fruit, and I was between labs. She'd been collecting easy hikes with something pretty at the end, and this one had been on her list since sophomore year. The Devil's Bathtub. Slick shale slides, narrow bridges, graffiti you can't Instagram without cropping out the curses. She packed us squashed sandwiches and a paperback for the aesthetic. I said I'd drive and be a good sport about cold water. Our fights had gotten smaller lately, which felt like progress, and I wanted a day that proved we were still mostly us. The parking lot was an unpaved rectangle, with trucks that looked like they'd been washed by storms, and one blue Subaru with "Welcome to the Mountains. Now be nice" on the bumper. The kiosk map was glossed with moisture the way Lacey said it always is at places like this, a varnish of air. Whoever maintains the trail had taped up a printed warning about flash floods and slick rock. At the bottom, in a different hand, a felt tip note wrinkled in the wet. If found, don't return items to water. Green marker, initialed sloppily with something that might have started with R. Someone had tried to go over the letters again, darker, like they were tired of the words bleeding out. The first creek crossing came too soon. The kind where you commit with both feet or go home to your couch. I watched Lacey skip 2 stones like she'd practiced, and I made my own heavy-footed way. The air changed in a way that didn't read as wind or shade. It felt mineral, like walking into the breath of a cave. The smells sorted themselves. Moss, struck matches, wet copper. I laughed because wet copper is how people describe blood, but there was no blood. Just that taste you get on your tongue from pennies and tap water that's run through old pipes. A white-haired man coming back the other way with a grocery bag towel and sunflower seeds gave us the universal stranger blessing. It's clear today. Just mind the bridges, and kept moving. I noticed how careful the frames of his glasses looked on his face, that particular mountain careful. The water was that ridiculous color even up close, like someone left a piece of the sky soaking in a bowl. We passed a flattened stump-turned altar, jar lids, a braid of twine, a coin bent in a way that made both of us go quiet. It looked like it had been bitten, the arc of a hard mouth in metal. Lacey leaned but didn't touch. She's the kind of person who'll step around an anthill on instinct. Offerings, she said, soft, like we weren't supposed to be overheard. Or litter with good intentions. She had a red scarf looped through her bag strap in case the gorge wind got cute. I watched it move when she walked and thought about how easily the place could unclip something from you without asking. There were other small things tucked in rock seams the way kids tuck notes into desk scratches. A bottle cap flattened with a name scratched into it in the big careful letters you only make if nobody taught you not to. A fold of cloth with a penny centered on it like a pupil. The penny had a crease. Lacey put it back where it sat. "Leave it like you found it," she said, not to me so much as to anything that might be listening. At the first basin, the slide had been carved by time into a chute you could picture giants using to wash their hands. A family debated letting a boy try it. A girl sat at the edge and scooped water in a loop like she was trying to knit with it. I dunked a hand and hissed, cold enough to make you smile without humor. Lacey spread the paperback open on a rock and admitted she'd brought it to pretend, not to read. We split our sandwiches and looked at the falls like we had earned the view. If I had to mark the first strange thing, it wouldn't be the offerings or the coin. It would be silence arriving where sound should dominate. The falls hushed. Not off on and not wind. A slow tightness of air as if the gorge held its breath and wanted us to notice. Then a misted exhale. The hairs on my forearms rose like they'd heard their name. The smell switched from moss to matches to that copper that has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with old water meeting air. "Did you?" I started. "Yeah," Lacey said, like we'd agreed to cut sentences short to avoid naming things that might ask for us by name. We went on, not talking about it. Past the bridge with initials cut into the railing by kids who were probably still on the trail, carving their next initials deeper, arguing about ampersands. Under the bridge, the creek gathered in a still pocket, and there was a black strap across it like a belt someone had unthreaded and forgotten. From a bag, Lacey said, practical. If we see it on the way back, we can leave it at the kiosk. She said it like a plan you make to get your balance back. The second basin had fewer people. A couple tried for a photo on a ledge with one foot on nothing, and I had to look away before my mouth made dad noises. I took off my shoes to commit to the experience and lasted to my ankles, a polite sacrifice to the gods of we made the drive. Lacey laughed, proud of me like I was a courageous toddler. I'm trying to tell this without turning it into a sequence of spooky reveals because it wasn't like that. Things felt normal and then off by half degrees, and the off gathered. When we turned back, mist had woven itself low across the creek the way spiders sometimes make their bead curtains in morning grass. The bridge boards carried that slick sheen you can't see until your foot reads it. Lacey went first. Halfway, the water exhaled again. It sounded like the falls had lungs. I felt, not heard, felt my full name in that breath. Not the nickname everyone calls me. The one my mother uses when she's reminding me she knows how I started. I turned, automatic, like someone in a crowd had called across it just for me. No one. Just white water paging itself over rock and the hush between it like a chest expanding. Then it braided my name with Lacey's, and I hated my body for how quickly I wanted to answer. Lacey stopped on the far end and looked back with a face that said, "Don't." She didn't have to say don't what. For once I listened. We reached a bend where the water sheeted itself thin over stone, a silk scarf pulled over a glass table. Lacey flicked at her wrist like she'd brushed a fly. A red thread stuck there, bright against her skin. She laughed at the coincidence and tried to peel it off with nails. The thread tightened, leading down into the sheet of water as if it were anchored under rock. The line found tension the way a fishing line does when something below decides it is time. "Seriously," she said, stepping back, but the thread didn't give. It cut a narrow smile into her skin. "Take it," she said. And I did. First with fingers, then frantic, then with the small knife I keep for opening stubborn plastic and, I guess, emergencies like the one we hadn't believed in that morning. The blade was nothing special, a dull flip-out with a nick from a college move. But when I slipped it under the thread, the line tightened the way a violin string tightens under a tuning peg. It bit my knuckle as I tried to lift it. Lacey hissed through her teeth like the thread had her nerve in a clamp. I cut. It didn't fray. It let go. The tension snapping into nothing so clean I stumbled. The severed piece anointed my fingertip, left a stain that didn't feel like dye. It fell to the rock and slumped as if it were heavier than it had any right to be. For a second I saw tiny scratches along it, marks like letters written too small to be read by anyone still living. Then it was thread again, red and ordinary, wet and clinging. We walked faster without naming our speed. At the next seam where the water caught itself, there was a ring. A simple band that looked like a working person's gold. Not fancy, not fake, not ours. It sat in a quiet pocket and pirouetted slow, the current turning it in a lazy circle. My brain filled with justifications. We could put it at the board. Someone would come looking. We'd be good. Lacey didn't look at the ring. She looked at me. "Leave it," she said, voice flat in the way she gets when she's holding the second half of a panic behind her teeth. A slick shelved run of water, a flat rock with scratched turtles on it, and "keep what you find" stenciled beside them in someone's attempt at whimsical mountain graffiti. A corner where sun should have warmed the air and didn't. We got the exhale again, smaller, like a contented person sighing after a difficult task. And then we heard it, a voice shaped by foam. It didn't sound like a person behind a bush. It sounded like air moving through the throat of water. It used my name and hers, and then it said something Lacey never told me she heard, and I never told her I did. It repeated a sentence I'd muttered in my head weeks earlier, when we were both too tired for tenderness. The kind of ungenerous thing you hope your thoughts can forgive you for, that I wished she could cycle through her 3 fears less often. It made it sound like a joke a friend would use to shock me out of defensiveness. It made it true and small at the same time, which somehow felt worse. Lacey didn't look at me. "Don't," she said. A single word with all the weight we had. I said, and shut up before I finished lying. Just before the last turn toward the trailhead, a piece of red lay on the rock like a stage prop. Lacey's scarf. It was spread perfectly, damp, edges arranged, a small snag in the exact place I knew. On top of it, my keys. The ring of them, the rubber fob, the loyalty tag from a sandwich place that shuttered last winter, the metal beaded with water in a way that made no sense for the heat, and at the edges, the beginning bloom of orange, like rust working in a time zone that wasn't ours. I picked them up like I was handling a living thing. A father with a toddler walked by and made a friendly comment about the water being colder than it had any right to be. The toddler reached fat hands for my keys, and something in me clenched so hard I almost barked. I didn't. The father's face did an oops mask for both of us, and they kept going. At the kiosk, the damp had soaked paper into another alphabet entirely. The same taped warning. If found, don't return items to water. The marker had bled, and someone had traced over the letters thickly, like a kid learning to write by making a path wider. The board to the right had printer paper collages of hikers who'd slipped or wandered and come back embarrassed and grateful. Bottom right, a new photo. Us. Like a candid. Me ankle deep with Lacey's hand on my shoulder. The exact posture we'd had that afternoon. Except the black stamp in the corner said last summer, a date we hadn't visited the gorge. 07-13-2024. The numbers looked like the kind you get on night vision security footage, the font that turns faces into evidence. I raised my phone to take a picture and got a blurred tea-colored smear. I took a photo of my shoe to make sure I wasn't going insane. That came out crisp. I tried the photo again, only brown static, like the printer ink was smoke only the camera could see. We left without saying, "Let's go." In town, we stopped for gas. The guy behind the counter had a trout for a belt buckle and a face like old wood. When Lacey set the keys down to dig for chapstick, he glanced at them and said, "You run those through water, son?" I said, "Creek." He said they rust fast that way. Take the battery out next time. He slid coins back toward me that felt light like costume money. One of them had a tender at the edge, as if someone had pressed the world's smallest pair of pliers there and waited. Back home, the keys made a faint sound on the counter, a tick that read as temperature difference. I wiped them dry. The towel took on damp that kept coming. Lacey went to the bathroom, turned the sink on and off, then on again. "It made a noise," she said, neutral, like a person about to explain something. That night, the air in our apartment practiced breathing. It gathered itself near the kitchen and unknotted near the bathroom and hovered by the AC unit in the window. It exhaled politely like it didn't want to wake the neighbors. When I opened the tap to break the held water, the breath settled through. The stream and I heard our names two at a time, braided together, casual as gossip. I stood with my hands on either side of the sink and said nothing until the air had the decency to pretend to be air again. We drove to Lacey's mom's for the weekend, because the word mom steadies the floor sometimes. On the way, Lacey slept and woke biting down on a dream about jar lids with names scratched into them, and little arrows pointing out in different directions like someone's broken compass. And when she touched the top lid, the whole stack slid and her hand learned, sliding too fast to stop. In her mom's kitchen with the magnet calendar from a break place on the fridge and the smell of potpourri that refuses extinction, we told a safe version of the story. "Those are pretty pools," her mom said. "Always wanted to go, never did." Heard stories. She said her aunt tied red thread on canning jars for the ones we were keeping, which is the sort of sentence you put in your pocket and pretend not to look at for years. When I finally said the loud part, that the water seemed like it had a mouth, her mom didn't laugh. "Some places talk," she said. "That doesn't mean you talk back." Then she smiled like she was letting me off a hook I'd hung myself on. Back in our apartment, life tried to reassert itself. Lacey worked late shifts. I wrote a lab report that reused the word gradient too many times. Some evenings were cold in a way air conditioners don't know how to be. Condensation rings appeared where no glass had been set. There was always the faint itch to look at drains as if they were eyes. A dog-walking neighbor told me his Tennessee, aunt used to say, "Keep what you find unless it calls you by name." He laughed when he said it like he hadn't meant to remember that old string of words, and his dog pulled him on. The trade offers started. I'd drop a paperclip and find a jar lid in its place under the couch, lid slick with a damp that didn't transfer to my fingers. I'd clean the sink and a penny would feel too soft in my palm, like the metal had been chewed. Lacey found a fold of red thread tucked into the spine of her notebook and didn't want to ask me if I had put it there because we both knew neither of us is subtle. Our arguments got quieter. We apologized for things we hadn't said. Some nights we slept like children. Some nights we lay still waiting for the apartment to finish its breathing cycles. When Lacey turned off the bathroom faucet, sometimes, the water held for one extra heartbeat before committing to stillness, like someone in a story who wants the last word. I suggested we go back and leave everything, keys, scarf, anything we'd seen on the rock below the board. I said I'd seen people do that at beaches and trailheads, a lost and found of faith. Lacey said that maybe the note on the board existed because returning is exactly what it wants. She said it in that careful way she uses with first years who think their paper will be deep if they choose a darker font. She started writing names in a small spiral notebook in the evenings, not of people but of things: thread, lid, coin, scarf, ring, strap, keys. She'd leave the notebook on the coffee table as if it were a place to return to if we got lost. I read it from across the room without touching it, like it might burn. 3 weeks out, I walked past the library window, late, and saw Lacey at the desk with a jar for pencils and a couple coins inside. One of the coins leaned from its edge as if it didn't understand how gravity rules work in glass. I stood too long, a creep with a backpack, until a student bumped my shoulder and apologized to me for my own strangeness. When I got home, the faucet exhaled before I turned it, like a gracious host anticipating a guest's thirst. I think it said my name and hers and a third version that sounded like my name spoken through cracked ice. We didn't go back because not going felt like a choice with its own spell built in. We also didn't not go back. We lived in the hallway between the two doors. Lacey said she dreamed of the kiosk again, only this time the photo of us was gone and the date stamp remained forward a year, 07-13 to 2026. I tried to be funny about how some printers are possessed by default, and she put her hand on my face, the way you do when you don't want to explain the part of fear that feels like faith. The smallest stuff does the worst work. The produce missed at the grocery store is just someone's machine hitting a timer, but my mouth tastes like pennies every time it starts, like I've been keeping coins on my tongue as a dare. A tiny red thread catches on my backpack strap when I'm about to board the campus bus. I pull it and it keeps coming. Long, longer than a seam allows, and when it falls into my palm it weighs more than thread should. I throw it in a trash can and it clings to the rim as if it knows better. I stop wearing the knife because it reminds me of the feeling of cutting something that wasn't meant for cutting. The scar on my knuckle is thin and painless and announces itself when I wash my hands, white then red, like a voice warming up. One afternoon after a thunderstorm, there was a coin on our doormat. It was a quarter bleached pale the way river coins are. For a second, I saw the bite again. I told myself it was a gouge from machinery. I told myself people drop coins constantly and you only notice on haunted weeks. I put the quarter on the counter and it left a halo the exact size of itself, a ghost water ring no glass had earned. Lacey didn't touch it. She looked at me like she was counting our breaths and deciding who got the last one if mathematics demanded it. I don't have a good ending, that's not coyness. Even the ranger note didn't promise one. Last night the apartment did its circuit of exhale. Bathroom, kitchen, vent, door. The same route we take when we check locks at midnight. The air paused at the door long enough for me to think a sentence that is going to sound stupid on a screen, but didn't feel stupid when it arrived. It was practicing leaving. Not giving up. Not forgiving. Making sure it could go and return as it pleased like the creek does around rocks. Lacey and I stood in the mini-hall between bedroom and living room and watched the empty. I said her name and she said mine, and for a moment the air didn't braid them. It let them sit side by side like two coins on a windowsill. If you go to that trail, and you will because beautiful places work like magnets and warnings are just iron filings around them, read the board. Not because of the words, but because someone kept tracing over them, darker and darker until the letters were thick enough to stand in for a person. If you see the altar stump with its coin that looks chewed, leave it the way you found it. If a red thread catches you, don't follow it deeper to figure out where it's knotted. If a voice in the foam uses your private vocabulary, pretend you are both better than your worst thought. And if on your way out you pass a rock with a scarf that looks exactly like yours and keys that smell like old pennies, remember the sentence the marker made. If found, don't return items to water. It's not a rule to save your life. It's the boundary where your life and the water's deal with names stop overlapping. Enough to trade. I want to be a person who never goes back and who also leaves a Tupperware on the rock with a note that says, for you, but not mine. I also want to be the kind of person who doesn't keep waking up at faucets. So far, I'm only good at waking. The breath is politely patient now, as if it understands rent cycles and the dignity of quiet neighbors. It waits for me to take the first sip before it does its little exhale like a stage cue. I don't bargain. I count my breaths and ruin it by listening for the one that isn't mine. Lacey ties her scarf like before. Sometimes she forgets it on a chair and I fold it. Not because I need to, but because the motion feels like a sentence you say softly to keep something from untying. Our photo might be on that board with an old date or a date that hasn't happened or not there at all. The keys work, though the edges bloom orange and I wipe them like a ritual. The knife sleeps in a drawer. The jar lids in my dreams have arrows I can't read. And the falls. We're 100 miles away and I hear them some mornings before the AC kicks on. The soft, satisfied exhale of something that knows every name we'll ever have, practicing its pronunciation until we answer. I'm not posting this because I want attention. I'm posting it because I can't keep the names straight in my head unless I set them down somewhere. And because driving alone up into the Laurel feels a little less like a mistake if I tell someone I did it. I'm a home health nurse and I've been in more people's kitchens than most folks ever will. I know the smell of every kind of stovetop cleaner and the smudged shapes family magnets leave on a refrigerator. I keep my kit in the passenger seat and a sandwich in the glove box like a bad secret. I have a route, I have patience, I have rules. Or I did until a woman named Eula asked me to take her to church. It started with a message from dispatch on a Tuesday. Patient request. Weekly ride to church, it said. Like that could be filed under wound care or medication reconciliation. The patient was new to me, living up near the county line where the road narrows and the FM radio gives up. When I did her intake, she'd called herself old as the wallpaper and laughed, a dry little flutter that didn't test the oxygen in her blood. She had a pair of gloves in her lap that looked like she wore them in the garden, back when she could stand for an hour without the chair nagging her name. She said her husband used to whittle time into something usable, which is the kind of sentence you only hear from people who never left. Is there a service time? I asked on the phone. I pictured a one-room church with wasp nests tucked up under the porch. Eula said, they'll be waiting, in the tone you use when you talk about children, and then she thanked me twice in the space of one breath. Like she'd been trained to repeat gratitude until it took. My friend Savannah works nights at the gas station on the highway. She keeps a paper cup of sunflower seeds under the register and a bat behind the counter, in case somebody gets brave at 2 a.m. I called her in the car and said, wish me luck, I'm taking a lady to a church the map forgot. She said, nope, in that bright way she has. Text me when you're done. If you don't, I'm coming after you with my antique paperweight. She means the brass knuckles she bought from a table that also sold old license plates and hand-poured candles. I promised to text. She made me promise again. If you've never driven up past where the county pretends it stops, it's hard to explain how the woods pinch the road until you feel like you're driving into someone's throat. The laurel there doesn't hang, it knits. The leaves have a shine that looks wet even when the dust is bone dry. Eula's place was a rental with vinyl siding and a porch the landlord had never quite committed to. A big plastic planter sat empty like a bowl waiting for a dog that died. She was dressed in a floral housecoat with buttons that didn't match. A pocketbook clamped in both hands like a seatbelt she could take inside with her. You came, she said, not surprised, just relieved. I'll be your ride, I told her. We'll see how far we feel like going. I do a lot of soft edges in this job. You learn to never promise what a road might break. Eula didn't want the walker. She took my arm and it surprised me how strong she was. The way older women keep their strength where you can't see it. In the grip, in the forearm, in the part of them that refuses to tip. The church wasn't on a road exactly. The gravel just thinned into a suggestion and then the laurel made a tunnel because it felt like making one. The air changed as soon as we stepped under it, cooler, damp, metallic. I felt it in my sinuses like a springhouse humming. Eula called it the sip, like the woods were taking a drink from us on our way in. Branches brushed my sleeves and then closed behind us without snapping. It wasn't a trick of wind. There wasn't any. It was the kind of quiet that has a pulse. The chapel was clapboard, white once and then not. The bell tower had a mouth with no tongue. A small graveyard slumped against it. Stones propped against stones the way tired men lean on a counter when the day has been too long to bother with posture. I noticed the moss first. Thick, furred, the kind that looks like it would be warm if you dared to touch it with your cheek. I didn't. Eula did with the back of her hand, the way you check a child's forehead. Inside, the smell was damp wood crossed with fresh laundry, which made no sense until I saw the altar cloth and realized it was always a little wet. The way stone is wet in a creek that never runs dry. The pews were small, children small, and clawed along the tops in repetitive, shallow scratches. Not animal gouges, not panic. The kind of marks a child's fingernails make if there's nothing else to fidget with. My brain filed it as historical wear just to keep moving. Where's everyone sit? I asked, because people don't stop going to a church if they have anywhere else to be. Eula didn't answer. She set her pocketbook on the front pew, tapped the altar cloth twice with the back of her fingers like she was knocking politely on a door, and knelt. I started to ask if she needed a cushion. Old knees, old floors, when a sound rose from under the planks. It wasn't the creak of wood or the settling that houses do to remind you they outlast you. It was whispering. Not ghost story whispering either. A small, ordinary sound the way a classroom sounds when attendance is being taken, and everyone wants to be good for the teacher. Names one after another, careful and quick. You know that breath people take when they answer present? That's what it was like. Little puffs of here, here, here from the dark space between joists. The hairs on my forearms went up in a wave. Eula placed her palm flat to the floor. Good afternoon, she said in that church voice people keep even when they don't keep churches. We have a helper today. Be polite. The whispers slowed like a long rope of sound coiling on itself. I caught one name, Ruthie, and then another that sounded like Lem. I know how this sounds typed out. I also know the difference between pipes, critters, and the inside of a throat making syllables on purpose. I'm a nurse. I talk to people who are breathing hard. I put my hand on them and feel rhythms organize. I know the trick of touching softly enough that a person keeps telling you what their body is saying, even if their mouth lies. I put my palm down where Eula had put hers and waited. It was cool. Smoother than old wood usually is. And for a second I felt like an idiot kneeling on a floor in a building without electricity. Then the tiniest hum braided up into my hand. A knot sound that shaped itself into a syllable. I didn't think it. I said it. Ruthie, and the floor breathed back, present. We went name by name. I'll spare you the full list the way you spare someone the details of your grocery receipt. But I learned the pattern. If I rushed, the hum scattered like minnows. If I slowed, the syllables met me. Some names were worn smooth old, a Sarah Jane, a Pearl, a Donald. Others had the new nicknames you get from people wanting to be quick. A couple came out muffled like a mouth with a palm over it. I went back and found those later with my hand, the way you can find a lost earring on a dresser by feeling for the place your eyes keep missing. When the last voice said here, the church exhaled and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Eula lifted a small tin from her purse, the kind old ladies keep lozenges in. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, were pale wafers. We do it simple, she said, and held one above the seam between two boards. The prayer she said wasn't fancy. It was a list whispered to a neighbor over a fence, rest quiet, thank you, hush. She pressed the wafer down and it went soft and stuck, wicking into the grain like a promise that wants to stay. Is this your church? I asked when my voice worked. Eula said, everyone's church, then no one's, then mine when it wouldn't mind its little ones. She didn't mean children exactly. She touched the pew tops where the scratches were and said, they all learn to keep still eventually, but you don't want them learning it alone. She gave me a wafer. I'm not someone who takes communion lightly, but it felt worse not to. It tasted like paper and mineral and the breath you hold in a stairwell. On the way back to the car, the laurel wrapped at my sleeve like I'd forgotten my manners. I told myself it was just how the branches hung. At Eula's, I made her tea as pale as she liked it, wrote down vitals that were fine enough for the day, and charted the outing under psychosocial support, because that phrase is a white coat you can fit anything under if you need to. I drove home with the radio off and my hand tingling like it had been asleep. I went back the next week and the next. When a habit isn't yours and you adopt it anyway, It either sits wrong in your mouth or it finds its own soft place to live. The names came faster the second week. They felt gladder, which is a ridiculous word to use for whispers under a floor, but that's what it felt like. I brought grape juice we could pour in a jar cap for a sip. I asked how many there were, and Eula said, "Depends on the week. Depends on the weather. Depends on who can be quiet without help and who can't." She tapped the altar cloth again, twice in that knuckle knock that had started to feel like a heartbeat for the room. I started noticing things I'd skimmed past the first time. A slight drift of cool air along the baseboard on the right side, like a draft but steady. The way the tiny crack in the back window made one thin branch of itself toward the top corner, as if the glass were scrawling its own name very slowly. The spring house uphill that I never saw but always felt in my sinuses. A drip like a metronome just off the beat. The pew scratches lined up with knee marks, shallow dents where small bodies would kneel. I pressed my thumb to one and it warmed under my skin like the memory left by someone who stood up just before you sat down. I told exactly 2 people. Savannah, because she knows how to hold a story without saying, "Girl, no." And the deputy we saw coming down the mountain in his Bronco, because he has a face you don't want to lie to. He drank gas station coffee like he was trying to punish it and told me to watch for potholes. Then he said, like he didn't mean to, "Old folks sit where they've always sat. If you want to know a hollow's got teeth, count the men who won't go there after dark." He didn't ask about pew scratches or underfloor syllables. He didn't say he believed me. He didn't say he didn't. You probably want to know why the names were there. I didn't ask outright because the answers to that question always come with splinters. At the county office one day, I saw a faded flyer under a plastic sleeve that said "Lost Children of," and the part with our county's name had been cut off. A school bus in a flood decades back. Most recovered, a few not. A note scrawled at the bottom, "Check closed churches." I took a picture and deleted it because my phone felt like it didn't deserve to carry that weight. When I did the names the next Thursday, 2 of the voices had a thickness to them, like they'd learned underwater and never quite forgot. I said those names slower and was careful with the prayer. It felt like the difference between bandaging a paper cut and a wound that wants to convince you it's not still bleeding. By week 5, the wafers in Eula's tin were low. I brought a new stack and she looked relieved in that small way old women get when a cupboard is full again. The roll call went as it always did. Ruthie, Lem, a Sarah Jane, a Pearl, and then the floor hesitated, a hiccup in the hum. I leaned my hand and waited, and a name shaped up that wasn't any of the ones I'd learned. It wasn't a child's syllables. It had the flat, common weight of a grown man's. I said it. "Here," the voice whispered. But it had a delay to it, a radio station just at the edge of the county. Eula's face didn't change. She let me hold the silence a beat too long and then said the plain prayer. On the way out, she put her hand on the pew with the deepest scratches and left it there. Not petting, just resting. "So many," she said to no one. The next day, a missing person notice went up at the gas station. A man with a dark beard, last seen near the service road. People shook their heads the way they do when they don't want to say words like novice, habit, supply. The deputy didn't mention it to me the next time our cars passed, but he lifted his palm off the wheel when I waved like he knew I was waving at more than him. Eula died on a Thursday. I knew before we left her house that she was wrong-tired. Her ankles had swollen against her socks the way lips swell when you bite them. The air in the room made my stethoscope cold. "Quick today," she said. "Rain talks too loud to them." It was bright outside, that flat bright the sky gets right before it realizes it's made a mistake. We went anyway. The laurel whispered the way stiff leaves do when they decide to move even without wind, and the path felt narrower underfoot. Inside, the hum was already coiled. I put my hand down and the names tumbled over each other like kids saying me first. I slowed them and heard the room settle. When I pressed the wafer along the seam, I did it like I was trying not to wake a baby. Eula's hands were flat on the boards. She didn't take a wafer. She said present in a voice that sounded like the first time she had said it in her life, and then she put her head down as if to rest between a hymn and a prayer. When I touched her wrist, the pulse flickered like a porch light at Halloween. Then it left. The floor gave one low, sympathetic hum that vibrated up through my kneecap and went out like a breath. I said her name because the room asked me to, and the room said here. Training says compressions. Training says call. There isn't a code for underfloor attendance and dough-thin wafers, and the way a church smells like pennies when someone leaves. My phone had one stubborn bar of pretend signal. I put Eula on a pew like you put a sleeping child somewhere. They'll be found by gentler hands than yours. I finished the names because stopping half a roll call felt like dropping a dish on purpose. Then I left the door open the way she told me to and fetched the deputy. He took his hat off and did what men raised a certain way do: checked, declared, recorded, softened. He called it in like it was ordinary to find an old woman gone quiet in a church without a congregation. He didn't ask about anything under the floor. He helped me walk her out the laurel throat like we were carrying someone half awake who might turn around and ask for 5 more minutes. The funeral was the kind where everyone knows exactly how many casseroles go into a single fridge. I went because she'd thanked me twice that first day, and because I had her tin in my bag and didn't know where else to put it. Her nephew cried with his mouth shut, which always looks like a prayer. The pastor from town said the usual soft things. I waited until no one was near and said what I knew in a whisper into the carpet. Present. I told myself that would be the end of it. The next Thursday I took a different route home and my car coughed once at a stop sign it had never coughed at before. The needle sat where it should. I turned the key again, it caught, and I laughed at myself because nerves make you stupid. I drove toward the highway, and at the turn where the gravel thins into suggestion, my blinker clicked without me meaning to touch it. I turned. If you want to chalk it up to habit or grief, I won't argue. The church did what rooms do when you come back to them after you've been gone exactly long enough to make a difference. It waited with its chin up. The hum rose when my hand did. The names came. I said them. I pressed the wafer. I left the door open. It wasn't heroic. It was a list done in order. My chest felt lighter in the way your chest does after you carry in the last of the groceries and know you can shut the trunk. For a month, that was the rhythm. Work highway Laurel names the tin. I learned to hear when one of them would try to go out of turn and I made them wait and praise them when they remembered how to be patient. If that makes me sound like I was raising children under a floor, don't think I didn't hear myself. I kept it to Thursdays because I'm not built strong enough to be more than I am. And because a week is the right size for repetition if you want to keep something from growing teeth. Then one afternoon, the new voice came again. Not a child. I recognized the name. It had been in the paper, the kind of brief they pinned beside the counter near the cigarettes. A woman this time, gone longer than anyone in town wanted to admit she might not be coming back. The hear came from the front of the room where the pew with the deepest scratches sat. It didn't fit. The hum behind it bent like a note you pull wrong on a harmonica. I said the name because saying it hurt less than leaving it unspoken. The floor gave me no answer I could live with. The Laurel tapped twice on the siding, a polite knock, and stopped. I did not press a wafer for her. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe it was a rule I invented to feel like I was doing anything but drowning. Savannah asked me if I wanted to get a drink. I said yes and meant it and stood her up an hour later because the memory of the wrong voice made my hands cold in the grocery aisle. She told me I was getting weird and that was fine, but to pick my weird on purpose. Otherwise it picks you, she said, and I thought about how many things up in that laurel seemed to be picking me lately. I kept going. I started sleeping with my palm open on the mattress like I was listening with it. Sometimes I woke to the tap of my own hand against the nightstand. A habit my body took from Eula without asking me. I'd stop. Then in the morning I'd find 2 dull prints on the wood like Knuckles had tested it for readiness. Once, a wafer shape darkened the seam of my kitchen table where the boards meet. I had to tell myself it was a spill from the grape juice I carried home by accident. I had to tell myself a lot of things. The deputy never asked me what I did on Thursdays. He did stop me one day. Not to ticket, just to say the road had eaten 2 tires that week and to be careful where the grade dropped. Then he tipped his hat at nothing and said, "Weather's trying to pry something loose." And I had to sit on the edge of my bathtub later that night and breathe through a wave of unreasonable crying because it felt like he had said exactly what my chest felt like. The path got tighter sometimes and looser others, like a throat swelling and unswelling. The crack in the back window began to split the way a vein splits into smaller truths. I kept an old sweater on the back pew because the air in the room could be summer warm at the door and cellar cool at the altar, and the difference made me stupid. I timed my visits now, half because I didn't want to be there in the dark and half because counting is the only way I know how to keep certain fears from expanding. I told myself I wasn't indispensable. I told myself anyone could do this. Then I pictured anyone kneeling on the boards and hearing the little present and felt possessive in a way that made me angry at myself. Near the first cold snap, I made a decision. No more church for a month. I would stop, take the long road home, listen to talk radio hosts argue about nothing, buy a bag of apples and 3 candles at the dollar store and pretend my life was the kind that stays between errands. I turned off my phone so I wouldn't check the time and justify anything to myself. I put the cart away in the rack because I am good, even when I'm bad. I started the car. It coughed once, twice. The engine caught. The idiot lights stayed dark. I told myself coincidence is big enough to hold a cough. At the stoplight by the feed store, the kind of light that thinks it's in charge of a city, I could have gone straight. I turned left. Plenty of people turn left for reasons that have nothing to do with Laurel or underfloor voices or a woman's tin. I turned left because I saw the word present in my head like a flicker, and I realized it wasn't the kid's answer I was thinking of. It was my own. The church was ordinary that day. The hum was patient. The names were themselves. I pressed the wafer and the seam drank it. I tapped the cloth twice because I have learned to borrow other people's rituals when mine aren't enough. I was halfway to the door when I looked up at the back window. The crack had grown a hair's breadth. If you didn't know it intimately, you wouldn't have noticed it. It curved a fraction toward a shape that wanted to be a letter. I stepped closer and it resolved into nothing, because that's what cracks do when you get nose close. The Laurel tapped once more. A third time, not louder but less polite. I left the door open, which has always felt like the right kind of wrong. Then I pulled it closed, gently, the way you close a door in a house with a baby in it. The latch clicked. The room behind the door didn't change. My chest did. I stood with my palm flat on the wood from the outside and said, "Later," to a room that doesn't accept appointments. I would love to tell you I learned a lesson and stuck to it. I didn't. I went the next Thursday and the next. I bring wafers wrapped in wax paper in my pocketbook now. Sometimes I hear a new name and it sits where the prayer can't reach. Sometimes I say a name and the answering here feels like it's coming from further away than it should. Sometimes the springhouse tick in my head is louder than the clock on my kitchen wall, and I have to stand in the doorway at home and tell myself out loud that I live where I live, that my floor is not a church floor, that air under my slab is just air. Savannah dreamed about me. She told me over coffee at her counter. "You were measuring a doorway," she said, "and I asked you how tall you were and you said no, this is how tall the room is without me." She laughed and said she needs to stop eating pizza before bed. She told me I looked tired and I told her I was fine. She slid me a cup I didn't pay for and said she'd pray something or cuss something if it would help. I picked cuss. It helped the way a harmless wrong thing sometimes does. Sometimes the deputy slows as he passes me on the gravel, like he isn't going to stop, and then he does. He doesn't get out. He rolls the window down and says something about weather or grade or how the county won't budget for a proper runoff. Once he said, "You're making a habit out of the mountain," and I said, "Or it's making one out of me." He didn't argue. He looked past my shoulder where the laurel knits and loosens and said, "Whatever you do, don't let it be proud of you." I laughed, a startled dumb sound, and drove away before I asked him what he meant, and heard an answer I'd have to write down to make real. If you think I'm lying, I can live with that. If you think I'm sick, I don't have a medicine to offer you. I only have the tin on my kitchen table that I keep meaning to tuck in a drawer and don't. I only have the sound of my own knuckles tapping twice on wood when I'm not thinking about it, and the way my hand goes still like it's listening for a breath that isn't mine. I have a list of names that come in the same order most Thursdays and 3 that do not. I have a promise I didn't mean to make that fits in my mouth better than any prayer I've ever learned. Tonight the sky's that sheet of gray that looks like it would tear if you put your thumb through it. The radio in the kitchen is talking to itself in a language made out of road conditions and sports scores and ads for trucks. I could do normal things. Chop an onion, rinse grapes in a colander, call my mother and lie to her about the weather. Or I could pick up my keys and drive without checking the gas, which is the kind of faith I know how to practice. I'm not a hero and I'm not cursed. I'm someone who knows the feel of old floorboards under her palm and the small relief in a voice saying present in a room that went too long without it. If I go, I'll turn where the gravel thins and the laurel says yes with its leaves. I'll carry the tin in my bag so I don't have to improvise a ritual I'm not qualified to lead. I'll say the names with the patience of a nurse who knows bandages come off cleaner if you don't yank. I'll press a wafer to the seam and the wood will hold it. I'll leave the door open unless the day feels like a day for closing, and then I'll shut it without a click. On the way down, if the engine coughs, I'll pat the dashboard like I'm soothing a child in a pew and tell it we're almost home. And when I get there, if my nightstand has those two dull prints on it again, I'll put my hand down between them and let the hum in my bones settle to the rhythm of a room that knows me. If I don't go, the path won't disappear. It never does. Laurel remembers. Rooms remember. You can ignore a knock and the door will still be a door, but I know what happens when roll call gets late. The names thicken. The hum turns into a kind of restlessness that creeps into your house and taps the plumbing and wicks through the grain of your table. It isn't punishment. It's attention. Some places send it like a weather change until you answer. I could be brave and defy it. I could let someone else be the stranger who learns the names. But some promises wear your voice like a glove the first time you say them. Ask anyone who ever said I do without knowing they were marrying more than a person. It's getting dark while I'm typing this. I can hear a bird on the railing trying to teach a metal sign to be a bell. I tell myself it isn't one. I tell myself I'll wait until next week. I tell myself I'll do the right thing for whatever counts as right down here where roads give up. I put the tin in my bag because it's easier to carry a thing than to decide what to do with it. I put my hand on the kitchen table for no good reason and feel for a second the shape of a name I didn't know I knew. When I say here out loud, it sounds ridiculous. Then it sounds right. Then it sounds like a door, closing softly enough that no one in the next room will wake and opening in the same breath. The way a throat does when it's about to speak.